My husband left a bright yellow sticky note on our marble table. It read, "I cannot stand you. The house is sold. Pack up your things and get out by Friday." I stood perfectly still for a few seconds, letting his audacity wash over me. Then I flipped that little piece of paper over, wrote exactly 3 words with my pen, and slapped it directly onto his chest. When he finally read what I had written, he panicked and left me 72 missed calls. Before I tell you the rest of this story, please let me know where you are watching from below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic partner a severe lesson. My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old and work as a forensic accountant in Atlanta. I uncover hidden assets, track offshore accounts, and dismantle corporate fraud for a living. You would think a man married to a financial bloodhound would know better, but arrogance makes people stupid. That Tuesday evening started like any other. I had just driven back to our Buckhead estate after a grueling 14-hour day auditing a corrupt logistics firm. My head was pounding, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a quiet evening. I unlocked the heavy oak front door, dropped my briefcase on the console, and walked into the dining room. That is when I saw it. The yellow square of paper sitting dead center on the custom huge and beautiful Italian marble table. I picked up the note. The ink was fresh. "I cannot stand you anymore. The house is sold. Pack up your things and get out by Friday." Before my brain could fully process the sheer disrespect of ending a 5-year marriage via office supplies, the front door swung open again. Desmond, my soon-to-be ex-husband, strolled into the foyer. He wore a tailored suit I had bought him for his birthday, but he was not alone. Clinging to his arm was Jessica, his 22-year-old assistant. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and triumph, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "What is this, Desmond?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm as I held up the yellow square. He chuckled, stepping fully into the dining room while keeping his arms securely around Jessica. "It is exactly what it looks like, Naomi. I am done. I am tired of playing house with a woman who is married to her spreadsheets. I need someone who understands my vision, someone who supports my empire." "Your empire," I repeated, suppressing the urge to laugh. Desmond was the CEO of a tech startup that produced flashy press releases but very little actual revenue. "Yes, my empire," he snapped his chest, puffing out with unwarranted pride. "And since you clearly cannot read, let me spell it out for you. I sold this house today. A private equity firm just wired the down payment, and the deal closes on Friday for $3.5 million. Jessica and I are taking that money and moving into a luxury penthouse in Midtown." Jessica offered a sickly sweet smile. "You really should start packing, Naomi. The new buyers want the place completely empty by the weekend. It is a shame, really, but a boring accountant like you could never afford to maintain a Buckhead mansion without a successful tech CEO paying the bills anyway. You will probably be much more comfortable in a small apartment on the south side." I looked at this girl barely out of college parroting the lies my husband had clearly fed her. Then my eyes drifted down to her wrist. A thick, sparkling diamond tennis bracelet caught the light of the dining room chandelier. It was unmistakable. "That is a beautiful piece of jewelry, Jessica," I said softly, stepping closer to her. "Custom, brilliant cut stones. Did Desmond tell you he bought that for you last month?" She puffed up her chest, completely missing the danger in my tone. "He did. He said I deserve the best because I inspire him to be great." I shifted my gaze to Desmond, watching the color drain slightly from his face. "It is funny, Desmond," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, "because last month you came to me practically in tears. You told me your startup was failing to meet payroll. You begged me to liquidate my personal stock portfolio to cover your employee salaries so you would not have to declare bankruptcy. I gave you $80,000 to save your company, and you used it to buy diamonds for your assistant." Desmond recovered his false bravado, quickly sneering at me. "Consider it a tax on my wasted youth, Naomi. You have always been obsessed with numbers instead of being a real wife. I am taking the $3.5 million from this house and starting fresh. You can take your cheap business suits and walk out the front door." He fully expected me to break down and scream in absolute agony. He expected me to cry, to beg, to throw things in a fit of hysterical grief. He truly wanted the satisfaction of breaking me so he could feel powerful in front of his young mistress. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not ever raise my voice. I looked at the note. I reached into my bag and pulled out my heavy Mont Blanc pen. I then flipped his arrogant little message over and wrote exactly 3 words on the blank side. Walking right up to him, I slapped the paper squarely onto his chest, turned around and walked out the front door into the warm Atlanta night, leaving him to figure out the catastrophic mistake he had just made. The 3 words I wrote for him to read were simple, cold, and final: call your lawyer. The heavy oak door of the Buckhead estate closed with a satisfying click behind me. I did not look back. I stepped into my waiting town car and directed the driver straight to the St. Regis Hotel. The plush leather seats offered a quiet sanctuary away from the pathetic display I had just left behind. By the time the concierge handed me the keycard to the presidential suite, my phone had nearly vibrated off the marble check-in counter. 72 missed calls, all from Desmond. I ordered a dry martini from room service, kicked off my heels, and finally looked at the glowing screen. The notifications were a rapid-fire sequence of escalating panic. First came the arrogant texts demanding I return and pack my garbage. Then the tone shifted violently. The voicemails told the real story. I tapped the first audio file and set the phone on the coffee table. Desmond sounded completely unhinged. His voice echoed through the luxurious suite. Naomi, pick up the phone right now. My real estate attorney just called me. The escrow account is locked. The $3.5 million from the buyer has not cleared, and the title company is saying the deed transfer is completely frozen. What did you do to the accounts, Naomi? Answer me. I took a slow sip of my martini, letting the cold gin burn pleasantly down my throat. Desmond was panicking because a man who builds his entire identity on fake wealth cannot survive when the actual money stops flowing. I opened my secure encrypted laptop and logged into my master financial dashboard. The numbers on the screen told a beautiful, undeniable truth. Desmond was an absolute fool. 2 years ago, he came to me sweating and trembling. His flashy tech startup was nothing but a facade built on aggressive marketing and massive tax fraud. He had been ignoring IRS notices for 18 months, and they were preparing to seize everything we owned, including the Buckhead mansion. He begged me to fix it. He pleaded with me to use my forensic accounting expertise to keep him out of federal prison. I did what any loyal wife would do. I cleaned up his radioactive mess. But I am not stupid. I knew a man who could steal from the federal government would eventually steal from me. To protect our core asset from being seized by federal agents, I legally transferred the deed of the Buckhead estate out of his name and into a highly secure blind trust. I named that trust Onyx Vanguard Limited Liability Company. Desmond signed the transfer paperwork without ever reading the fine print, because he was too busy celebrating the fact that he was not going to jail. He assumed the trust was just a standard tax shield protecting his precious empire. He never bothered to check who the sole managing director of Onyx Vanguard was. Now, 2 years later, he thought he could effortlessly sell our marital home to a private equity firm from New York. He thought he could take the $3.5 million, buy a penthouse for his naive young mistress, and leave me with absolutely nothing. But Desmond just sold the house to a corporate buyer without realizing that the holding company making the purchase was fully owned and operated by his own wife. The funds were frozen because I instructed my bank to flag the transaction for suspected wire fraud. Desmond had signed a legally binding contract to sell a property he did not technically own to a buyer he did not know was actually me. He had effectively trapped himself in a federal financial crime. My phone buzzed again, displaying another incoming call from my frantic husband. I hit decline and played the next voicemail. The arrogance had completely vanished from his voice, leaving only raw desperation. Naomi, please call me back. The title company is saying Onyx Vanguard requires a secondary authorization signature. Jessica is crying because the penthouse broker needs the deposit by tomorrow morning. I need you to fix this. We can talk about the divorce. We can share the money. Just unlock the escrow account. I closed my laptop with a sharp snap. Share the money. He wanted to share the money that I had protected, the money that technically belonged to my trust, while he paraded around town with a girl 10 years my junior. The absolute audacity of his request was staggering, but perfectly aligned with his narcissistic personality. He truly believed he could manipulate me into submission because I had always played the role of the quiet, supportive accountant behind the scenes. He mistook my professional silence for personal weakness. That was a fatal miscalculation. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city was full of men exactly like Desmond. Men who wore expensive suits, leased luxury cars they could not afford, and relied on the brilliant women in the background to sustain their illusions of grandeur. For 5 years, I had been the invisible architect of his success. I had balanced the books, hidden his failures, and smiled politely at galas while he took all the credit. I had endured his condescending remarks about my boring career while my brilliant financial strategies kept a roof over his head. That era of my life was officially over. I was no longer interested in protecting his fragile ego. I was interested in absolute total financial ruin. Just as I turned away from the window, a sharp, demanding knock echoed through the suite. It was not the rhythmic tap of room service. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding. I checked the time. It was nearly midnight. Desmond would not have made it past the lobby security without causing a massive scene. I walked to the heavy wooden door and glanced through the brass peephole. My grip on the door handle tightened. Standing in the hallway, glaring impatiently at the camera, was Beatrice. My elitist high society mother-in-law had arrived. She wore a pristine white Chanel blazer and a scowl that could curdle milk. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open, bracing myself for the inevitable storm she brought with her. Beatrice did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me the moment the door cracked open, her pristine white Chanel blazer brushing against my arm. The heavy scent of her signature Tom Ford perfume immediately filled the entryway, struggling to mask the sheer toxicity of her presence. She marched directly into the center of the living room, her sharp heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She took one look around the opulent suite and sneered, as if my mere presence was contaminating the expensive upholstery. Without a single word of greeting, she reached into her quilted leather handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto the glass coffee table with a heavy thud. "There is $20,000 in there," she snapped, crossing her arms over her chest. "It is in small bills, untraceable. Take it, sign the divorce papers Desmond is having couriered over in the morning, and vanish. Go back to whatever Southside slum you crawled out of before you manipulated my son into marrying you." I slowly closed the suite door, locking it before turning to face her. I did not look at the envelope. I looked directly into her cold, judgmental eyes. "You drove all the way to the St. Regis at midnight to hand me cash, Beatrice. Desmond must be truly terrified if he sent his mother to do his dirty work." "Desmond did not send me." Beatrice spat back, her posture stiffening. "I came here because I am tired of watching my son drag our family name through the mud by associating with you. I told him 5 years ago that marrying a woman who counts other people's pennies for a living was a catastrophic mistake. You have no pedigree, Naomi. You have no connections. You never belonged in our world. Your little accounting degree might impress the people in your old neighborhood, but in Buckhead, you are nothing but glorified hired help." "And Jessica does?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Your son is throwing away his marriage for a 22-year-old assistant. Does that fit your strict standard of high society elegance?" Beatrice let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Do not play the victim with me. I have known about Jessica for 6 months. In fact, I helped Desmond pick out the interior finishes for that midtown penthouse he promised her. Jessica knows her place. She knows how to stand quietly and look pretty while a successful man builds his legacy. You, on the other hand, always had to be the smartest person in the room. You always had to prove you were his equal. You are not his equal, Naomi. You never were." The sheer malice in her voice would have crushed me a year ago. I used to spend hours agonizing over how to earn this woman's approval. I attended her charity luncheons, donated to her ridiculous causes, and forced myself to smile through her passive-aggressive insults about my background. But standing here now, watching her defend her son's infidelity, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating clarity. If you are so concerned about the family legacy, I said, walking slowly toward the coffee table, then you should be terrified of what happens when the banks realize Desmond is completely bankrupt. He has zero liquidity, Beatrice. That is why the house sale is frozen. Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, her diamond rings catching the light. Desmond is going through a minor cash flow transition. It means nothing. Our family is about to be completely untouchable, and your petty little spreadsheet accounting tricks will not mean a single thing to any of us. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her arrogant confidence. Untouchable. That is a very strong word, Beatrice. She smiled, a wicked, triumphant expression that mirrored her son's earlier bravado. Tomorrow morning, my other son, Julian, and his beautiful wife, Chloe, are closing a $50 million commercial real estate deal. They are securing a massive downtown property portfolio that will solidify this family as the most powerful dynasty in Atlanta. Chloe comes from real money, Naomi. She is a true socialite with a father who sits on the boards of 3 different banks. She understands how a legacy is built. She does not sit behind a cheap desk auditing tax returns. She leverages her incredible privilege and her family connections to elevate us all. Chloe is the absolute standard of what a wife in this family should be. I stared at her, letting her words hang in the quiet air of the suite. Chloe, the wealthy white daughter of a banking executive, was Beatrice's ultimate prize. Beatrice had spent years worshiping Chloe, treating her like absolute royalty while treating me like dirt on her shoe. Chloe was untouchable in Beatrice's eyes, protected by generations of old money and systemic privilege. What Beatrice did not know, what nobody in this arrogant family knew, was that I had spent the last 3 weeks conducting a silent, highly illegal forensic audit of Julian and Chloe's upcoming mega deal. Desmond had carelessly left a secure folder of Julian's financial projections on our kitchen island last month. I had taken one look at the raw numbers and immediately spotted the glaring, impossible discrepancies. I dug deeper, tracing the shell company's offshore accounts and completely fraudulent property appraisals. Julian and Chloe were not closing a legitimate $50 million real estate deal. They were attempting to execute one of the most reckless wire fraud and money laundering schemes I had ever seen in my entire professional career, and their privileged names were all over the forged federal documents. I looked down at the thick envelope of cash sitting on the glass table. $20,000. It was a pathetic attempt at a bribe from a woman who had absolutely no idea that her entire world was about to violently collapse. She thought she was discarding a nuisance. She did not realize she was taunting the only person who had the power to prevent her precious family from facing severe federal indictments. I reached down and picked up the heavy envelope. Beatrice's smug smile widened, assuming I was finally submitting to her demands. She adjusted her Chanel jacket, preparing to deliver her final parting insult and walk out a winner. But I did not open the envelope. Instead, I stepped forward and calmly slid the cash right back into the front pocket of her expensive leather handbag. "Keep it, Beatrice," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy register. "You are going to need every single penny of that cash to post bail for Julian and Chloe by the end of the week." Beatrice snatched her leather handbag from the table, her face flushed with a mixture of confusion and absolute rage. She opened her mouth to scream another insult, but my deadpan expression stopped her cold. She spun on her expensive heels and marched out of my hotel suite, slamming the heavy door so hard the walls shook. I locked the deadbolt, finished my martini, and went to sleep. I slept better that night than I had in 5 entire years. The next morning, I woke up early, put on my sharpest charcoal power suit, and drove my Porsche to my corporate office building in downtown Atlanta. I am a senior forensic accountant at one of the top financial firms in the state. I do not play games with money. When I stepped off the elevator and walked into the glass-walled lobby, my receptionist gave me a highly panicked look. She pointed discreetly toward the main conference room. I did not need to ask who was waiting for me. I could already hear the shrill, entitled voice echoing through the frosted glass. I pushed open the conference room door. Sitting at my custom mahogany table was Julian Desmond's older white brother-in-law and his wife, Chloe. Chloe was the family darling. She was a wealthy, well-connected socialite who had never worked a hard day in her entire life. Sitting perfectly straight next to them was a man in a ridiculously expensive bespoke suit who reeked of intimidation tactics. He was clearly a high-powered corporate attack dog hired to scare me into submission. Chloe looked me up and down with absolute disgust. She crossed her long legs, smoothing her designer skirt, and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. Naomi. She began, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. We really did not want to do this the ugly way. We always knew Desmond settling for a girl from your background would end in a messy ghetto disaster. But this little stunt you are pulling with his house sale is completely unacceptable. You do not belong in our tax bracket, and you certainly do not have the intellectual capacity to play financial chess with this family. I walked to the head of the table and set my briefcase down, completely ignoring her insult. Good morning, Chloe. Julian, I see you brought a guest to my office without an appointment. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows aggressively on the table. He inherited his wealth and carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world. Drop the professional act, Naomi. Desmond called us in a complete panic last night. You froze the escrow account on the Buckhead house. You are locking up $3.5 million of my brother's money. We know you are just a bitter, scorned woman trying to extort him because he finally realized he deserves someone younger and better. Unfreeze the account immediately, or we will destroy you. Chloe chimed in, her voice rising in pitch. If you do not sign the release forms today, I will personally make a few phone calls to the state board. My father plays golf with the director of the Accounting Ethics Committee. I will have your certified public accountant license permanently revoked before lunch. You will be blacklisted from every major firm in Atlanta. You will be back to doing cheap tax returns in a strip mall by Friday. The attack dog lawyer finally spoke. He did not introduce himself. He just reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid the papers aggressively across the smooth mahogany table until they stopped right in front of my hands. This is a comprehensive non-disclosure and asset relinquishment agreement. He stated, his voice cold and menacing. You will sign this immediately. You will release the hold on the Onyx Vanguard Trust. You will walk away from the Buckhead estate, from Desmond's tech company, and from this family with nothing. If you refuse, my firm will bury you in endless litigation. We will drown you in legal fees until you are completely bankrupt. We have unlimited resources to drag this out for a decade. Sign the paper, Naomi. I looked at the thick stack of legal threats. I looked at Julian, whose face was twisted into a smug, victorious grin. I looked at Chloe, who was already checking her diamond-encrusted watch as if dismissing me from her busy schedule. They truly believed their white privilege and old money could simply bully me into submission. They thought I was just a heartbroken wife throwing a temporary tantrum. I did not say a single word. I did not even bother to read the first page of their highly expensive legal threat. I calmly picked up the entire stack of documents, walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting in the corner of my conference room, and turned it on. The machine roared to life. I fed the thick non-disclosure agreement directly into the steel blades. Julian and Chloe watched in absolute stunned silence as their expensive legal intimidation was reduced to worthless paper ribbons in a matter of seconds. The lawyer stood up, his face turning bright red. "What is wrong with you?" he shouted. I turned off the shredder and walked back to the table. I opened my laptop and connected it to the massive projector screen hanging on the wall behind me. "You brought a lawyer to threaten my license, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "But you should have brought a criminal defense attorney to save your own freedom." I pressed a button on my keyboard. The giant screen illuminated the room. Displayed for all of them to see was a highly detailed forensic map of Julian and Chloe's supposedly untouchable $50 million commercial real estate portfolio. The portfolio they were supposed to close on tomorrow. I picked up a laser pointer and aimed the bright red dot squarely at the center of the massive corporate web. "You think you are untouchable, Julian?" I asked, stepping closer to the screen. "But numbers never lie. This $50 million portfolio is entirely funded by a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. A shell company that has been illegally funneling stolen charity funds directly into your personal bank accounts for 3 years." Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Julian's smug grin completely vanished, replaced by sheer pale terror. The high-powered lawyer stared at the screen, his arrogant posture crumbling, as he realized he was sitting in a room with clients who were actively committing massive federal wire fraud. I smiled at them, cold and victorious. My forensic trap was officially sprung. The high-powered attorney was the first to break the heavy silence that followed my declaration. He slammed his manicured hand flat against my mahogany table, recovering his aggressive posture in a desperate attempt to regain control of the room. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face and began shouting. "This is textbook defamation," he barked, his voice echoing off the glass walls of my conference room. "You are throwing around wild, baseless accusations simply because my clients are evicting you from your home. We will sue you for every penny you possess, Naomi. We will take your firm, your license, and your dignity. We are leaving right now, and you can expect to be served with a massive lawsuit before the end of the business day." I did not flinch at his loud, booming threats. I simply pressed the small button on my laser pointer, advancing to the next slide of my presentation. The massive screen flashed, bringing up a highly complex web of bank transfers, wire receipts, and offshore corporate registrations. "Sit back down," I commanded, my voice, carrying the absolute authority of a woman who held all the cards. "You are not going anywhere until I am finished. And if you walk out that door right now, I am hitting send on an email directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service." Julian swallowed hard, visibly sweating in his custom-tailored suit. He looked at his lawyer, pleading silently for help, but I kept my eyes locked on the screen. "Let us look closely at your brilliant $50 million real estate empire, Julian," I said, walking slowly over to the projected image. 5 years ago, you claimed to have secured seed funding from an anonymous angel investor to purchase 3 large commercial properties in downtown Atlanta. But this raw financial data proves that there was never any angel investor. I traced the exact origin of those initial funds. They came directly from an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands, an account that was entirely funded by small recurring deposits from the local youth charity your lovely wife Chloe currently runs. Chloe turned a sickly shade of gray. Her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looked like a plastic mask melting under intense heat. "That is a complete lie," she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "You hacked our private files. You fabricated this entire presentation just to ruin my family because you are jealous." I ignored her pathetic outburst and advanced to the next slide. The screen now displayed 5 consecutive years of Julian's corporate tax returns, side by side with the charity's official bank statements. "You see, Julian has not made a single legitimate dime in over 5 years," I explained, pacing the length of the room. "Every real estate development project his company touches operates at a massive loss. The building contractors are heavily overpaid, the materials are artificially inflated, and the properties sit completely empty. But magically, at the end of every fiscal quarter, his company posts a remarkable profit. How does that happen? It happens because Chloe funnels massive untaxed donations from her wealthy friends directly into the Cayman Shell Company. Then that shell company continuously overpays for bogus consulting services provided by Julian's failing real estate firm. You are washing dirty money through fake commercial leases, and you are doing it so sloppily that a first-year accounting student could spot the paper trail." The attorney stood up abruptly, his face tight with anger and rising panic. "That is entirely enough," he shouted, stepping between me and his wealthy clients. "You have illegally obtained private financial documents. This entire presentation is completely inadmissible in any court of law, and my prestigious firm will see you prosecuted for corporate espionage. Do not say another single word, Julian. We are leaving this instant." I slowly turned my gaze away from Julian and focused entirely on the sweating attorney. I pressed the button on my remote one final time. The screen changed to display a highly sensitive federal document. It was the official incorporation paperwork for the Cayman Islands Shell Company. I walked right up to the attorney, looking him dead in the eyes. "I would be very careful about your next move, counselor," I advised, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. I pointed my laser directly at the bottom of the projected document. Right there, sitting right next to Julian's signature, was the official stamp and signature of the registered corporate agent. It was the lawyer's exact signature. "You are not just representing them," I stated clearly, so there could be no misunderstanding. "You are an active co-signer on fraudulent international documents." According to Title 26, Section 7206 of the Federal Tax Code, willfully making and subscribing to any document verified by a written declaration that you do not believe to be true and correct as to every material matter is a massive federal felony. You are listed as the primary registered agent for 3 different shell companies that are actively laundering stolen charity funds. You are not their legal counsel right now. You are their co-conspirator. The blood completely drained from the lawyer's face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a bespoke suit. He looked at the massive screen, then looked down at his own trembling hands. The aggressive intimidation tactics, the expensive suit, the arrogant threats, they all instantly evaporated into thin air. He was no longer a high-powered corporate attack dog. He was a terrified man staring directly down the barrel of a 15-year federal prison sentence and the permanent loss of his license to practice law. Julian grabbed the lawyer's arm, his voice desperate and pleading. "Do something. Threaten her again. Tell her she cannot use this against us." The lawyer violently yanked his arm out of Julian's desperate grip. He did not say a single word to Julian. He did not even look at Chloe. He wildly grabbed his expensive leather briefcase, shoving the shredded pieces of his useless non-disclosure agreement inside. He practically ran to the heavy glass door, pulling it open and sprinting out of my corporate lobby as fast as his legs could carry him. He completely abandoned them, leaving the supposedly untouchable couple sitting entirely alone at my conference table. The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Julian stared blankly at the empty chair where his legal protection had just been sitting a moment ago. His arrogant posture had fully collapsed into a pathetic slump, but Chloe refused to surrender to the reality of the situation. Her immense privilege and blinding entitlement simply would not allow her to accept defeat from a woman she viewed as completely beneath her social standing. She leaped out of her chair, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her hands were shaking violently as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You think you are so brilliant," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "You think some ghetto spreadsheet is going to take us down? You think you can destroy my powerful family with a simple PowerPoint presentation? You are absolutely nothing, Naomi. You are just a bitter, scorned woman who got thrown out like the trash you are. You do not even have a single dollar to your name to fight us in court anyway. Desmond just locked you out of all your joint bank accounts this morning." Chloe stood perfectly still, panting heavily as her face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She fully expected me to collapse into a pathetic puddle of tears right there on the corporate carpet. She expected me to beg for mercy from her wealthy, powerful family. Instead, my cell phone vibrated loudly against the polished mahogany table, cutting through the heavy silence of the conference room. The bright screen lit up with an incoming message from Desmond. I slowly picked up the phone, keeping my eyes locked directly on Chloe. She smirked, crossing her arms tightly over her chest, truly believing her brother-in-law had just delivered the final, devastating death blow to my life. I tapped the notification. Desmond had sent a high-resolution screenshot of our joint checking account portal. The available balance read exactly $0.00. A second text message immediately popped up beneath the image. It read, "Have fun paying for that luxury hotel suite, beggar." I looked back up at Chloe, who was now practically glowing with vicious triumph. She had clearly coordinated this entire morning ambush with my husband. They genuinely thought they had broken me. "You can leave my office now, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You have exactly 48 hours to figure out how you are going to explain a massive federal money laundering indictment to your wealthy banking executive father. I highly suggest you spend every single second of that time finding a criminal defense attorney who will not run away at the first sight of a complex spreadsheet." Chloe opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult, but my receptionist stepped into the glass doorway accompanied by two large building security guards. Chloe grabbed her expensive designer handbag and stormed out of the conference room, practically vibrating with intense fury. Her expensive heels stomped against the floor as security escorted her all the way to the elevators. Once the room was completely silent, I sat back down in my leather ergonomic chair and let out a soft, genuine laugh. Desmond truly thought he had outsmarted me. He actually believed he had orchestrated a brilliant financial maneuver by draining our shared checking account and leaving me completely destitute on the streets of Atlanta. I opened my encrypted laptop and navigated past my forensic presentation software, opening my highly secure personal financial dashboard. The truth sitting on the screen was glaringly obvious. I am a senior forensic accountant. I track sophisticated corporate fraud and dismantle massive international money laundering rings for a living. I do not leave my personal assets exposed to an insecure, narcissistic tech executive who cannot even balance his own company checkbook. Over 14 months ago, I realized Desmond was secretly spiraling into massive high-interest debt just to maintain his fake billionaire lifestyle. That is exactly when I quietly and legally stopped depositing my substantial corporate salary into our joint bank accounts. I quietly rerouted all of my primary income, my annual bonuses, and my lucrative independent consulting fees into a private blind trust completely shielded from his greedy, irresponsible hands. The joint account he just proudly drained only contained the small household allowance I left there to pay for groceries and utility bills. But the absolute best part of Desmond's arrogant little screenshot was the pending transaction history sitting right below that bold zero balance. Desmond thought he had successfully transferred $200,000 from our joint account into a brand new offshore account he had set up for himself and Jessica. He thought he was moving the last of our liquid cash to fund his new glamorous penthouse lifestyle in Midtown. He was completely wrong. My fingers danced quickly across the laptop keyboard as I pulled up the actual federal routing trace. The $200,000 did not go to his offshore account. It was intercepted and completely seized by an automatic federal recall. 3 weeks ago, I compiled a highly detailed, meticulously sourced anonymous dossier regarding Desmond's unpaid corporate taxes and his blatant payroll fraud. I included copies of his fake vendor invoices, his artificially inflated expense reports, and his illegal misuse of company funds to buy diamond jewelry for his young assistant. I basically handed the federal agents a fully solved criminal puzzle tied with a neat little bow, and I submitted it directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. Desmond's desperate bank transfer triggered an immediate federal freeze and asset seizure. The United States government took every single penny to satisfy his outstanding corporate tax liens. My ex-husband was currently sitting in a midtown high-rise, completely broke, owing millions of dollars in federal penalties, and bragging about a bank transfer that never actually cleared. I closed the secure dashboard, feeling a deep, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct line to the St. Regis concierge desk. The phone rang only once before a polite professional voice answered. "Good morning, Ms. Naomi. How can we assist you today?" "I need to extend my stay in the presidential suite," I replied, leaning back comfortably in my chair. "Please book it for the entire month. Add the premium dining package and arrange for a private executive driver to be on call for me every single morning." The concierge eagerly confirmed the lavish arrangements and politely asked for payment. I pulled my heavy, solid titanium black card from my designer wallet and read the numbers aloud. The massive transaction was approved instantly. Desmond wanted me to be a weeping beggar on the street, but I was living like absolute royalty on the formidable empire I had built all by myself. I ended the call feeling completely invincible. I had just dismantled his elitist family, sent his high-powered lawyer running for the hills, and trapped him in an inescapable federal tax nightmare. I reached for my coffee mug, ready to head back to my desk and dive into my client files for the rest of the day. But before my fingers could even brush the warm ceramic handle, a high-priority security alert chimed aggressively from my laptop speakers. A bright red banner flashed rapidly across the top of my screen. It was an urgent, heavily encrypted email from Richard, the managing partner of my accounting firm. Richard was a brilliant, highly respected financial veteran who never panicked under any circumstances. But the subject line of his email was written in all capital letters. Urgent immediate suspension and embezzlement investigation. I clicked the email open, my eyes scanning the frantic text as my heart suddenly dropped. Richard informed me that an anonymous package had just been delivered to the executive board. The package contained hundreds of fabricated digital records and highly sophisticated forged wire transfers, all completely framing me for shifting massive amounts of money out of our top client accounts directly into my own private trusts. Desmond was not just trying to take my money. My husband was actively trying to destroy my entire career and put me in federal prison. I grabbed my car keys off the polished glass desk and practically sprinted to the private elevator. The drive from the St. Regis back to my corporate headquarters was a total blur of adrenaline. By the time I pushed through the heavy double doors of our executive suite, Richard was already pacing the length of his corner office. He did not offer his usual warm greeting or offer me a seat. He just pointed to a massive cardboard box sitting squarely on his desk. Inside that box was a printed replica of the digital dossier. Richard handed me the top file. His face was grim and his jaw was clenched tight. "Naomi, I have known you for 7 years." Richard began, his voice tight with genuine distress. "I know you are meticulous. I know you are honest. But this package was couriered directly to the State Ethics Board, the senior partners, and the local authorities simultaneously. The allegations are incredibly specific and highly damaging." I opened the file and began flipping through the pages. My eyes scanned the spreadsheets, the printed emails, and the wire transfer logs. It was a masterpiece of digital forgery. Someone had meticulously recreated my exact email signature, my daily login timestamps, and my specific professional phrasing. They had fabricated a multi-million-dollar trail of breadcrumbs, making it look like I was actively siphoning funds from our wealthiest corporate clients into a shadow account registered under my maiden name. But the detail that made my blood run absolutely cold was the IP address, stamped at the very bottom of the digital login logs. The fraudulent transfers were supposedly executed directly from my home office network. Desmond. My husband ran a technology company. He had spent the last decade building sophisticated software architecture and masking digital footprints for his highly questionable clients. Spoofing my home IP address and fabricating a few corporate emails was absolute child's play for him. He had used the very network I paid for to frame me for a massive federal crime. Richard ran a hand through his graying hair, looking exhausted. "I am legally obligated to initiate an immediate internal audit, Naomi. You know the protocol better than anyone. Until we can verify every single transaction in this dossier, I have to suspend your credentials. I need your security badge, your access keys, and your corporate laptop right now." I am so sorry. I did not argue with him. I did not cry or plead my case. I calmly reached around my neck, unclipped my security lanyard, and placed it gently on top of the fabricated files. I handed him my encrypted laptop without a single word of protest. I knew Richard was just doing his job. He was protecting the firm from liability. Desmond was counting on this exact institutional reflex to strip me of my resources, my income, and my power. "I will clear my name." "Richard?" I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of panic. "And when I do, I am going to require the firm's full legal backing to prosecute the person who manufactured this absolute garbage." I walked out of the building with nothing but my personal cell phone and my purse. The midday Atlanta sun was blinding as I stepped onto the pavement. Just as I reached the handle of my Porsche, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. The caller ID flashed Desmond's name. I slid into the leather driver's seat, closed the heavy door to block out the city noise, and pressed answer. "Well, well, well," my husband sneered, his voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. "How is your day going, Naomi? I hear the accounting business is getting a little rocky for you this afternoon." "You are a complete fool, Desmond," I replied, leaning back against the headrest. Wire fraud is one thing, but fabricating federal financial documents is a mandatory minimum sentence. You are actively digging your own grave. Desmond let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that echoed through the phone speaker. No, Naomi, you dug your own grave the second you thought you could outsmart me. You really thought you could freeze my assets and steal my house. You thought your little trust fund trick was going to leave me begging on the street. I built a technology empire from scratch. I manipulate digital infrastructure for a living. You honestly thought you could beat me at my own game. He paused, letting his venomous ego take full control of the conversation. I remember watching you sit at the dining room table for 3 straight years. Desmond continued, his tone dripping with deep-seated misogyny and fragile insecurity. You were constantly hunched over those pathetic little CPA textbooks studying until 2 in the morning. You were so proud of your boring little rules and your neat little spreadsheets. You thought passing a standardized test made you my equal. It is honestly pathetic. While you were memorizing tax codes, I was building a real empire. I was networking with billionaires. I was creating wealth out of thin air. You are just a glorified human calculator, Naomi. And now you do not even have that. I let him rant. I let him expose every single ounce of his pathetic, fragile masculinity. Here's the deal, Desmond finally said, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening register. I can make all of that nasty evidence disappear. I can wipe the servers and recall the anonymous tips before the state board officially files charges. But you are going to sign over the Buckhead estate. You are going to dissolve the Onyx Vanguard Trust today. You are going to sign a divorce agreement, walking away with absolutely nothing. If you refuse, you are going to federal prison. You have exactly 1 hour to decide, beggar. He hung up the phone. The line went dead. Desmond truly believed he held the ultimate checkmate. He thought his tech background made him a digital god. He thought because I was quiet, because I was methodical, because I played by the rules, that I was technologically illiterate. I started the Porsche engine. I did not drive to a lawyer's office. I did not drive back to the hotel. I drove straight to the heavily guarded private wealth management bank in downtown Atlanta. I walked past the marble columns and requested immediate access to my secure safety deposit box. The bank manager escorted me into the steel-reinforced vault and left me entirely alone. I opened the long metal drawer. Sitting inside next to my passport and a stack of emergency cash was a heavy military-grade encrypted hard drive. I picked it up, feeling the cold metal against my palm. Desmond thought he was an absolute genius for spoofing my home IP address. What he did not know was that 5 years ago, when his shady business partners first started coming around our house, I quietly installed a hidden phantom server on our home network. I had been silently logging, monitoring, and archiving every single keystroke, every deleted email, and every illegal wire transfer Desmond ever made. I had the raw, unedited source code proving exactly how he fabricated the evidence against me, along with 5 entire years of his own actual corporate crimes. I placed the hard drive carefully into my designer bag and smiled. You really should not play digital chess with the woman who built your firewall, Desmond. The heavy glass doors of my corporate building swung open as I walked back out into the blistering Atlanta heat. The digital dossier Desmond had fabricated was still sitting on Richard's desk, a ticking time bomb designed to end my professional life. Desmond thought I would be cowering in my hotel room, frantically calling defense attorneys and crying over my frozen bank accounts. Instead, I was holding the exact weapon required to burn his entire world to the ground. I sat in the driver's seat of my Porsche and pulled Desmond's silver burn phone from my pocket. I needed to verify exactly how deep this criminal syndicate ran before I made my next move. I scrolled through the encrypted messages between my husband and Chloe. The arrogance in their text exchanges was absolutely staggering. They spoke about laundering millions of dollars like they were discussing dinner reservations. Chloe had sent a message just 3 days ago. The text read, "The charity gala pulled in $2.4 million. The board thinks it is sitting in the endowment fund. I need your portals to wash it clean by Friday before Julian closes the downtown property deal. Make sure your little accountant wife stays entirely out of the home network." Desmond had replied less than a minute later. "Do not worry about Naomi. She is completely clueless. The portals are live. Julian can expect the clean transfer by Thursday morning. We are going to be kings. I stared at the glowing screen, the sheer audacity of their betrayal making my blood run completely cold. Desmond had mocked me for studying late into the night to earn my CPA license. He had belittled my career as counting other people's pennies. Yet here he was, risking decades in federal prison just to act as the digital cleanup crew for his brother-in-law's fraudulent real estate empire. He was risking our home, our livelihood, and our freedom just to earn the approval of Beatrice and her golden couple. I took high-resolution screenshots of every single message and forwarded them directly to my secure offshore cloud server. Desmond thought he had boxed me in with his fake embezzlement dossier, but he had unknowingly provided the exact federal evidence I needed to prove my innocence. If the State Ethics Board or the FBI looked closely at the digital signatures on Desmond's fake portals, they would instantly recognize the identical coding structure he used to spoof my home IP address. His attempt to frame me was going to become the very evidence that convicted him. My cell phone suddenly vibrated in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was an incoming call from Julian. I smiled, answering the call and putting it on speakerphone. Naomi, Julian's voice boomed through the speakers, thick with panic and poorly disguised rage. "What the hell did you do? The bank just called me. The commercial escrow account for our $50 million deal is completely locked. They are demanding a federal review of the Cayman shell companies you projected in your office. You need to call them right now and tell them your presentation was a mistake." "You do not give me orders, Julian," I replied calmly, pulling my car smoothly out of the parking garage. "The forensic data is already in the hands of the bank's compliance division. You and Chloe are completely exposed." "Listen to me, you crazy bitch!" Julian screamed, losing all remaining shreds of his high society composure. "You think you can just sabotage my family and walk away? Desmond told me about the package he dropped off at your firm. You are under investigation for embezzlement. Your license is effectively dead. If you do not call the bank and clear my name, I will personally ensure the district attorney fast-tracks your indictment. We will bury you, Naomi." I let out a soft, chilling laugh. "You cannot bury someone who already owns the graveyard, Julian. You are trying to threaten me with a fabricated embezzlement dossier created by my husband. A husband who, by the way, is currently under investigation by the IRS for unpaid corporate taxes. But that is not even the best part." I paused, letting the silence stretch out agonizingly over the phone line. I could hear Julian breathing heavily on the other end, his panic escalating by the second. "I had a lovely little chat with Jessica at Phipps Plaza this morning." I continued, my voice smooth and conversational. She was very eager to hand over Desmond's secondary phone to save herself from an accessory charge. "Did you know Desmond kept highly detailed encrypted logs of every single fake payment portal he built for Chloe's charity galas? I am reading the text messages right now, Julian. Your entire $50 million real estate portfolio is funded by stolen donations." Julian stopped breathing. The silence on the phone was absolute. "I am pulling up to the St. Regis now, Julian," I said, shifting my car into park. "You and Chloe have exactly 1 hour to get down here and meet me in the hotel lobby. If you are even 1 minute late, I am sending this entire encrypted chat log directly to the federal authorities. Do not test me." I hung up the phone before he could respond. I walked through the luxurious hotel lobby, the concierge giving me a polite nod as I headed straight for the private VIP lounge area in the back. I ordered a sparkling water and sat down in a plush leather armchair, waiting for the final act of this pathetic family drama to unfold. Exactly 45 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of the lounge flew open. Julian and Chloe practically stumbled into the room. They looked absolutely horrendous. Chloe's designer dress was wrinkled, and Julian was sweating profusely through his expensive suit. They looked frantically around the room, spotting me sitting calmly in the corner. They rushed over, dropping into the chairs opposite me, looking like two terrified children called to the principal's office. "What do you want?" Naomi Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. Her usual arrogance was completely gone, replaced by raw, unfiltered terror. I placed Desmond's silver burn phone perfectly in the center of the small table between us. "I want everything," I stated, my eyes locking onto hers. "I want the Buckhead estate completely free and clear in my name. I want Desmond to sign a full confession regarding the fabricated evidence he sent to my firm. And I want you, Chloe, to transfer the remaining $2.4 million from your precious charity endowment directly into my Onyx Vanguard trust account as an official consulting fee. Julian choked on his own breath. You cannot do that. That is extortion. That is our entire liquidity. It is a consulting fee for preventing you from spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary, I corrected him coldly. You are going to sign the paperwork immediately. And then you are going to call Beatrice and tell her exactly how a woman from a South Side slum just took complete ownership of your untouchable family dynasty. I watched Jessica sprint out of the high-end boutique, her designer shopping bags practically bouncing against her shaking hips. She had surrendered Desmond's unlocked silver burner phone the second I showed her the federal wire fraud statutes. I sat alone in the quiet luxury of my private fitting room and looked down at the glowing screen. The direct messaging app was still open. Desmond and Chloe were not just having casual conversations about family money. They were operating a fully integrated digital syndicate. I bypassed the boutique security, slipped out the back entrance, and walked straight to my car. I locked the doors, connected the burner phone directly to my encrypted forensic laptop, and initiated a full data extraction. The progress bar crawled across my screen while my software decrypted 5 years of hidden ledgers, offshore routing numbers, and encrypted chat logs. I am a master of untangling corporate financial webs. I spend my life tracking missing pennies through massive global accounts. When the primary financial map finally populated on my dashboard, the sheer magnitude of their deception took my breath away. It was brilliant in its sheer reckless audacity. Chloe was the glamorous public face of the Vanguard Foundation for Underprivileged Atlanta Youth. It was a highly publicized nonprofit organization that supposedly provided scholarships and housing for marginalized teenagers. Beatrice used this exact charity as her personal crown jewel. It was her golden ticket to maintain absolute supremacy in Atlanta's black high society circles. Beatrice threw lavish luncheons, hosted silent auctions, and paraded marginalized children in front of cameras to secure her spot on every elite magazine cover in the city. She painted herself as the ultimate philanthropic savior. But the unredacted digital ledgers on Desmond's burner phone told a deeply sinister story. The Vanguard Foundation was nothing but a massive illegal funnel. I traced the incoming donation routing numbers line by agonizing line. Millions of dollars were pouring into the charity from wealthy donors, corporate sponsors, and state grants. But instead of going to scholarships or community housing, the funds were immediately transferred into a dark web of Cayman Island holding accounts. Desmond had used his tech background to build an automated ghost script. The moment a legitimate donation cleared the charity's primary bank account, his software instantly scrubbed the origin data, fabricated a fake consulting invoice, and diverted the cash into 2 separate illegal streams. Stream A flowed directly into Julian's failing commercial real estate portfolio, artificially propping up his bankrupt shell companies. Julian was using stolen charity money to qualify for massive federal construction loans. Stream B flowed straight into Desmond's fake technology startup, covering his massive payroll deficits and funding his extravagant penthouse lifestyle with Jessica. They were literally stealing millions of dollars from impoverished youth to pay for bespoke suits, luxury cars, and high-end mistresses. A sharp, bitter memory hit me like a physical blow. I leaned back against the leather seat of my Porsche, staring blankly at the steering wheel. My hands gripped the leather until my knuckles turned white. Just last year, Beatrice had cornered me at the annual Vanguard Winter Banquet. She had marched up to me in front of a dozen wealthy socialites holding a crystal champagne flute and a gilded donation pledge card. She had looked down her nose at my modest evening gown and publicly shamed me. She announced to the entire room that if I wanted to prove I actually belonged in her elite family, I needed to contribute to the legacy. Desmond had stood right next to her, sipping his bourbon and staring at the floor, refusing to defend his wife. Beatrice told the crowd that people from my background usually take charity, but it was time for me to finally give back. She forced me to write a personal check for $10,000 right there on the spot. I had drained my personal savings account that month just to appease her, just to stop the relentless, humiliating comments about my Southside upbringing. I had handed over $10,000 of my hard-earned corporate salary, thinking I was helping underprivileged kids from my old neighborhood. I sacrificed my own financial security, believing I was funding after-school programs. In reality, I was directly funding Desmond's infidelity and Julian's fake real estate empire. Beatrice had manipulated me into paying for my own husband's mistress. The raw fury that ignited inside my chest was unlike anything I had ever felt. It burned through the last remaining shreds of my patience and professionalism. This was no longer just about protecting myself from a framed embezzlement charge. This was no longer a simple divorce negotiation. This was about completely annihilating a family of parasitic predators who preyed on the most vulnerable people in our city. I turned my attention back to the encrypted chat logs. Chloe and Desmond were in an absolute frenzy of digital communication. Julian was completely panicked about the frozen escrow accounts, but Chloe was demanding that Desmond keep the payment portals open. I clicked on an audio file Desmond had saved just 2 days ago. Chloe's shrill, condescending voice filled the quiet interior of my car. Desmond, you need to ensure the offshore routing is completely untraceable, she commanded through the recording. Julian is being a weak, pathetic coward about the bank freeze. But we do not need to panic. We just need to wash one more massive deposit. The governor is officially confirmed for Saturday night. Make sure your pathetic accountant wife stays entirely locked out of the home network until the transfer clears. I paused the audio file and quickly opened Chloe's public social media profiles. My screen was instantly flooded with glossy, high-definition promotional graphics. Chloe was aggressively advertising the Vanguard Foundation's 10th anniversary Platinum Gala, scheduled for this upcoming Saturday evening at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. The promotional videos featured Chloe and Beatrice, smiling brightly, standing arm in arm in front of a newly constructed community center. The caption read, "Join us for a historic night of giving. We are expecting to raise over $3 million to secure the future of Atlanta's brightest youth." They were planning to execute their largest federal heist in broad daylight with the governor of Georgia sitting at the head table. They intended to collect millions of dollars in public donations and instantly wash the money through Desmond's shadow servers to save Julian's collapsing real estate deal before the bank auditors could seize his properties. I locked my laptop and secured the burner phone in my briefcase. Chloe wanted a historic night. Beatrice wanted to cement her untouchable high society legacy. Desmond wanted to prove his digital superiority and frame me for his crimes. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I was going to let them gather every single elite power player in the state of Georgia into one highly publicized ballroom. I was going to let them smile for the cameras, accept their massive fraudulent checks, and toast to their own brilliance. And then, I was going to lock the doors and show the entire world exactly who the real criminals were. I did not waste a single second of the remaining daylight. I opened a highly secure portal to my Onyx Vanguard trust, the exact blind trust Desmond believed he had completely drained earlier that morning. My independent wealth was entirely untouched and currently sitting at over $8 million, thanks to years of quiet, high-yield investments and highly lucrative independent consulting fees. I initiated a direct proxy line to a boutique distressed asset firm based in New York. Julian was drowning in underwater loans for his commercial properties. His primary real estate holding company, Apex Development, was carrying a massive mezzanine loan that was exactly 72 hours away from total default. The original lender was desperate to offload the toxic debt before the end of the fiscal quarter. I authorized my trust to purchase the entire debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar. The financial transaction cleared the international servers in less than 40 minutes. I was no longer just Julian's quiet sister-in-law. I was his primary secured creditor. I held the sole legal authority to foreclose on his entire commercial empire the second he missed his next scheduled payment, which was conveniently due this upcoming Friday afternoon. I closed my laptop and rubbed my temples, feeling the satisfying weight of absolute control settling over my shoulders. I walked into the marble bathroom of my presidential suite to wash my face and gather my thoughts for the next phase of my plan. The heavy mahogany door of my hotel room suddenly clicked loudly and swung open. I froze, water dripping from my chin. Desmond stood in the entryway holding a thick manila folder and a duplicate magnetic keycard he had undoubtedly bullied out of a terrified hotel concierge by throwing his corporate weight around. His eyes locked onto mine in the mirror reflection. There was no trace of the charming, polished tech executive he usually presented to the outside world. His face was twisted into a dark, cruel sneer. He slammed the hotel door shut behind him and aggressively threw the heavy deadbolt. "You are a remarkably stubborn woman, Naomi," he said, taking slow, deliberate steps across the Persian rug. He tossed the manila folder onto the glass coffee table. The papers spilled out, revealing a brutally one-sided divorce decree and a property deed transfer for our Buckhead estate. "Sign them," he demanded. His voice was low and dangerously tight. I reached for a plush hand towel and calmly dried my face, never breaking eye contact. "I am not signing anything, Desmond. I already told you I am taking the house." Desmond lunged forward, bridging the gap between us in two rapid, terrifying strides. He grabbed my upper arm, his strong fingers digging painfully into my skin, and violently shoved me back against the marble bathroom doorframe. I felt the cold, hard stone against my spine, but I did not flinch or cry out. I did not give him the satisfaction of showing an ounce of fear. I kept my breathing perfectly even. As his hand pinned me against the wall, I subtly tapped the side digital dial of my smartwatch, initiating a continuous high-definition audio recording. "You really do not understand your position here, do you?" He hissed, his face inches from mine. His breath smelled of stale coffee and aggressive, unhinged entitlement. "You are currently suspended from your prestigious firm. Your corporate access is entirely revoked. Your shared bank accounts are frozen by the federal government. You are a completely penniless fraud, Naomi. I hold every single card in this deck." "You hold fabricated digital evidence," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level to ensure the hidden microphone caught every single syllable. "You spoofed my home IP address to fake an embezzlement scheme. You are risking decades in a federal prison just to cover up your own massive financial failures." Desmond laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that reverberated loudly off the bathroom tiles. He tightened his bruising grip on my arm, leaning his entire body weight against me to establish absolute physical dominance. He was a pathetic coward, relying on brute physical force because his intellect was rapidly failing him. "You are pathetic, Naomi," he sneered, leaning closer. "Nobody is ever going to believe a suspended, disgraced accountant over me. I built the encrypted payment gateways for Chloe's charity. I wash millions of dollars through the Vanguard Foundation straight into my personal offshore accounts every single quarter. I literally clean Beatrice's precious high society donations and funnel them right back into my own pockets. My digital footprint is absolutely flawless. I am a ghost in the machine. You have no proof, no money, and no future. You are going to sign those divorce papers right now, or I will call Richard and personally hand him the password to the shadow server linking your maiden name to the stolen client funds." I stared directly back into his angry, deeply insecure eyes. I let him bask in his fabricated superiority. I let him outline his exact money laundering methodology involving Chloe's charity explicitly out loud. "Okay," I whispered, feigning total defeat and letting my shoulders slump. "Let go of my arm. I will sign the papers." Desmond released me with a triumphant, arrogant scoff, shoving me slightly forward. He smoothed the lapels of his expensive custom suit jacket, a deeply smug smile returning to his face. He truly believed he had broken my spirit through sheer physical intimidation. He pointed sharply toward the coffee table. "Read them carefully," he mocked. "You get to keep your pathetic little sedan. I am taking absolutely everything else. You have until tomorrow morning to vacate this luxury hotel suite before I cancel the corporate credit card on file. Have a nice life, beggar." He turned his back on me and walked out of the suite, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him. I stood alone in the center of the quiet room, massaging the red finger marks blooming on my upper arm. My heart was pounding aggressively against my ribs, but my mind was sharper than ever. I tapped my smartwatch, immediately stopping and saving the recording. The audio file was pristine. His voice was loud, clear, and unmistakably boastful. He had explicitly confessed to building the payment gateways and laundering charity funds directly into personal offshore accounts. I walked quickly over to my encrypted laptop, synced my watch, and extracted the audio file. I did not send it to the local Atlanta police. Local authorities could easily be swayed or bought off by Beatrice's massive political connections. I needed someone entirely untouchable. I opened a secure encrypted messaging channel and typed in the direct contact information for Marcus. Marcus was my old college accounting study partner. We had spent hundreds of hours dissecting complex federal tax law together before he went on to become a senior forensic investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington. I attached the pristine audio file along with the primary screenshots of Desmond's ghost server ledgers. I typed a single accompanying message. Marcus, listen to the attachment. I have a live money laundering operation actively funneling millions through a registered charity in Atlanta. The primary suspects are hosting a high-profile fundraising gala this Saturday night. I have the digital keys to their entire network. Let me know if the SEC wants to crash a party. Saturday morning arrived with heavy storm clouds gathering over the Atlanta skyline. It was the perfect backdrop for a reckoning. Marcus had replied to my encrypted message in less than 3 minutes late last night. The SEC was not just interested. They were coordinating with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI White Collar Task Force. They were letting the gala proceed exactly as planned to catch Julian Desmond and Chloe red-handed executing the transfers in real time. They needed the digital portal to go live to secure the final physical warrants. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an incoming call from Sarah, the head florist for the Vanguard Foundation. I had personally hired her last year when Beatrice forced me to join the planning committee. Naomi. I am so sorry to bother you, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with anxiety. Beatrice just marched through the grand ballroom with her private security team. She handed them a photograph of you. She gave explicit orders that you are absolutely forbidden from stepping foot on the property tonight. I sat up in the plush hotel bed, pulling the silk sheets around my shoulders. Did she give a reason, Sarah? She is telling all the vendors and the board members that you had a severe mental breakdown yesterday, Sarah explained, sounding genuinely horrified. Beatrice told the catering manager that Desmond had to have you involuntarily institutionalized after you tried to embezzle from your own firm. She is telling everyone you are dangerous and completely unhinged. I closed my eyes, letting the sheer venom of Beatrice's lie wash over me. It was the classic playbook of a wealthy narcissist. Discredit the victim before they can speak the truth. Paint the whistleblower as insane to protect the family empire. 2 years ago, Beatrice had pulled this exact same stunt when her former housekeeper threatened to sue for unpaid overtime. Beatrice had smeared the poor woman's reputation across the city until no one would hire her. Now she was trying to deploy that same weapon against me. Thank you for telling me, Sarah, I said, my voice perfectly calm. Do not worry about the security detail. I will see you tonight. I ended the call and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite. Beatrice thought she could lock me out of a building that her son-in-law was rapidly losing. She had completely forgotten that I spent my Friday afternoon executing the hostile takeover of Apex Development's toxic debt portfolio. Julian had officially missed his scheduled mezzanine loan payment at exactly 5 o'clock yesterday evening. My blind trust, the Onyx Vanguard Trust, instantly triggered the default clauses. I was now the sole legal proprietor of Apex Development. And Apex Development owned the very ground the Atlanta Conservatory of Arts stood on. I opened my laptop and pulled up the commercial lease agreement for the venue. I found the direct cell phone number for Marcus Thorne, the general manager of the conservatory. I dialed the number and waited as it rang. Marcus Thorne, speaking a gruff professional voice, answered. Good morning, Marcus. This is Naomi. I am calling regarding the Vanguard Foundation Gala tonight. Miss Naomi, Marcus stammered, clearly caught off guard. I am sorry, but Beatrice explicitly instructed me to flag your name at the gate. I cannot let you in. She threatened to pull the entire event contract if my staff allowed you past the perimeter. Beatrice does not hold your commercial lease, Marcus, I stated firmly, cutting through his panic. Apex Development holds your lease, and as of 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon, Apex Development went into total default. My private trust purchased the debt. I am your new landlord. I own the building you are standing in right now. Dead silence echoed over the line. If you check your corporate email, you will see the official transfer of deed and the emergency injunction. I continued pressing my advantage without giving him a single second to breathe. You have two choices tonight, Marcus. You can listen to Beatrice and I will terminate your commercial lease effectively immediately tomorrow morning, padlocking your doors and bankrupting your business. Or you can personally escort me through the front doors tonight, bypassing Beatrice's rent-a-cops entirely. I could hear Marcus swallowing hard, audibly clicking keys on his keyboard as he opened his email. A sharp intake of breath told me he had just read the legal attachments. What time should I expect you, Miss Naomi? He asked, his voice completely devoid of resistance. 9 o'clock sharp, I replied. Make sure the red carpet is rolled out. I hung up the phone, a deep, satisfying warmth radiating through my chest. They had spent my entire marriage treating me like an unwanted stray dog. They thought they could shame me, silence me, and discard me whenever I became inconvenient. They thought my quiet compliance was a sign of weakness. They were about to learn that my silence was simply the sound of me building a flawless trap. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously preparing for the evening. I did not want to just attend the gala. I wanted to command the entire room the second I walked through the double doors. I wanted Beatrice to choke on her champagne. I wanted Desmond to realize that he had lost everything before I even opened my mouth. A knock at the hotel's suite door signaled the arrival of my personal stylist. She wheeled in a heavy garment bag, unzipping it to reveal a breathtaking custom-made emerald green gown. The silk fabric caught the light, shimmering with understated, devastating power. It was structured and severe, clinging to my frame and pooling elegantly at my feet. It was not a dress for blending into the background. It was a dress built for absolute dominance. I spent 2 hours in the styling chair. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, flawless chignon, highlighting the sharp angles of my face. My makeup was striking and bold. My lips painted a deep, rich crimson. I slipped into the emerald gown, feeling the cool silk slide against my skin. I paired it with a single diamond tennis necklace and matching drop earrings. I looked into the full-length mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back. The exhausted, anxious wife who used to beg for Desmond's affection was completely dead. The woman in the mirror was a predator ready to feast. At exactly 8:30, my phone buzzed with a message from the concierge. My transportation had arrived. I grabbed my clutch, carrying nothing but my lipstick and a single sleek flash drive containing every piece of evidence required to send the entire family to federal prison. I walked out of the suite, taking the private elevator down to the lobby. The hotel staff stopped and stared as I walked through the marble atrium, the emerald silk trailing behind me like a liquid shadow. I stepped out into the humid Atlanta night. A pristine, black chauffeured Maybach was idling at the curb. The driver immediately stepped out, opening the heavy rear door and offering a respectful bow. "Good evening, ma'am," he said smoothly. "The Atlanta Conservatory of Arts." "Yes," I replied, sliding into the luxurious leather interior. "Take me straight to the front." The Maybach pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the heavy Saturday night traffic. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Beatrice thought she controlled the guest list. Desmond thought he controlled the narrative. They were throwing a multi-million-dollar party to celebrate their own brilliant corruption. They had gathered the governor, the mayor, and every single elite power player in the state into one room. It was the perfect stage. I leaned back into the soft leather and smiled a cold, dangerous smile. I was heading straight for the epicenter of Atlanta's elite, and I was bringing the absolute destruction of their dynasty with me. The heavy tires of the Maybach crunched against the pristine white gravel of the Atlanta Conservatory of Arts driveway. The venue was a magnificent architectural marvel of glass and steel nestled perfectly within the lush botanical gardens. Tonight it was illuminated by hundreds of brilliant spotlights piercing the humid night sky. Valets in crisp white jackets rushed forward the moment my driver brought the massive vehicle to a gentle halt. The door swung open and I stepped out onto the plush crimson carpet. The air was immediately electric. A blinding wall of camera flashes erupted from the press line cordoned off behind velvet ropes. Society photographers from every major southern luxury magazine were elbowing each other for the perfect shot. They had no idea who I was, but they recognized power when it stepped out of a $500,000 car. The emerald silk of my custom gown caught the flashing bulbs, shifting like dark water as I walked toward the grand entrance. I kept my chin high and my expression completely unreadable. I glided through the towering glass doors and stepped into the breathtaking grand foyer. The space was draped in cascading white orchids and filled with the low, elegant hum of a live string quartet. Waiters carrying silver trays of vintage champagne wove through a sea of tuxedos and designer dresses. And there, right in the center of the room, perfectly positioned on the sweeping dual marble staircase, stood the absolute picture of high society royalty. Beatrice was holding court on the landing, flanked by Desmond, Chloe, and Julian. They were posing for a prominent editorial photographer, projecting the ultimate image of charitable grace and generational wealth. Beatrice wore a silver beaded gown, her diamonds sparkling under the massive chandelier. Chloe clung tightly to Julian's arm, while Desmond stood tall and smug, playing the role of the brilliant tech billionaire supporting his family's noble cause. I walked directly toward the center of the room, the crowd naturally parting around me. My emerald dress swept across the polished marble floor. Beatrice saw me first. The practiced, regal smile instantly melted off her face. Her perfectly powdered skin drained of color before flushing a deep, violent shade of purple. Her eyes went wide with genuine shock and absolute fury. She had spent the last 24 hours telling every elite power player in Atlanta that her daughter-in-law was locked inside a psychiatric ward. Seeing me standing there radiating absolute control completely shattered her carefully orchestrated narrative. Beatrice aggressively abandoned her pose and snapped her fingers, snapping the attention of the head of security. She pointed a trembling manicured finger straight at my chest. "You do not belong here," Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper, meant to command the room without alerting the press. "Escort this deranged woman off the premises immediately. She is dangerous. Remove her before she ruins this evening." 3 massive security guards in dark suits immediately detached from the perimeter walls and moved rapidly toward the center of the room. They formed a tight, intimidating wall of muscle directly in my path. The surrounding guests fell completely silent, stepping back and creating a wide circle around the confrontation. The string quartet faltered and stopped playing. The entire ballroom held its breath. I did not take a single step backward. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked dead onto Beatrice's panicked, furious face. Before the lead security guard could even extend his hand to grab my arm, a voice boomed across the cavernous marble foyer. "Stand down immediately." Marcus Thorne, the general manager of the conservatory, pushed his way violently through the crowd of wealthy donors. He was sweating profusely through his tuxedo collar, practically sprinting toward the base of the staircase. He inserted himself directly between me and the security detail, holding his hands high in the air. "Do not touch her," Marcus commanded, his voice echoing off the glass ceilings. "This woman is not a trespasser. Step back right now." Beatrice descended 2 steps, her face twisting in aristocratic outrage. "Marcus, what on earth do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her tone dripping with absolute authority. "I am paying for this venue. I gave you explicit orders. Remove her." Marcus took a deep breath, pulling at his collar, and turned to face the entire crowd. His voice shook slightly but carried to every single corner of the silent room. "I apologize, Beatrice, but I cannot do that," Marcus declared loudly, ensuring every reporter and socialite heard his next words clearly. "Miss Naomi is not just on the guest list. She is our highly esteemed guest of honor. And as of yesterday afternoon, she is the sole legal owner of this estate." A collective shocked gasp ripped through the crowd. Camera shutters began clicking furiously, capturing the raw, unedited reactions of Atlanta's most powerful family. Julian physically recoiled as if he had been punched directly in the chest. His jaw dropped open and his eyes darted wildly between me and Marcus. The words owner of the estate had just violently clicked into place inside his terrified brain. He realized in that exact second that the anonymous distressed asset firm that had swallowed Apex Development's toxic debt was not a Wall Street vulture. It was me. I owned the very ground he was standing on, and I held the legal right to completely liquidate his fraudulent real estate empire. Chloe looked completely baffled, clutching Julian's arm and staring at me like I was a ghost. Desmond completely lost his mind. He abandoned his polished tech executive persona in a fraction of a second. He stormed down the marble stairs, practically shoving his mother aside to get to the landing. He marched right up to me, his face contorted with rage and desperation. He ignored the cameras, he ignored the crowd, and he ignored the fact that his entire world was actively crumbling. "What the hell is this?" Desmond growled through gritted teeth, leaning his face inches from mine. "What kind of insane stunt are you pulling, Naomi? You are broke. You are suspended. You do not own anything. You are trespassing, and I am going to have you thrown in a jail cell." I remained perfectly still, letting his fragile, insecure rage wash completely over me. I reached out smoothly and picked up 2 crystal flutes of champagne from a passing waiter's silver tray. I held one out toward my husband. Desmond stared at the glass, his chest heaving with heavy, angry breaths. He snatched it from my hand, spilling a few drops onto the marble floor. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my own flute, maintaining absolute, steady eye contact. "I am just here to make a donation, darling," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and loud enough for Beatrice to hear every single word. "But before we get to the giant novelty checks, I highly suggest you check the stage." Desmond frowned, his eyes darting away from my face. He turned his head, looking past the grand staircase and directly into the main charity ballroom. The heavy velvet curtains had been pulled back. Moving with terrifying silent precision, a dozen federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical windbreakers were systematically sealing every single exit in the building. As Desmond watched in sheer absolute horror, a senior IRS criminal investigator and 2 armed FBI agents stepped calmly onto the brightly lit main stage, pulling silver badges from their jacket pockets. Chloe was entirely intoxicated by the blinding glare of 100 flashing press cameras and the sheer undeniable volume of wealth gathered in the grand ballroom. She was so completely absorbed in her own manufactured moment of glory that she failed to process the tactical windbreakers moving with deadly quiet precision in the shadows of the stage wings. She brushed right past the senior IRS criminal investigator, assuming he was simply a new addition to the private security team Beatrice had hired to keep the riffraff out. She strutted directly to the center acrylic podium, tapping the microphone with a perfectly manicured fingernail. A high-pitched feedback squeal silenced the room. Chloe leaned into the microphone, a practiced look of deep, manufactured sorrow washing over her flawlessly contoured face. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice trembling with fake emotion, "tonight is a monumental triumph for the Vanguard Foundation. Looking out at all of you, I am overwhelmed by your incredible generosity. Because of your open hearts, the underprivileged youth of Atlanta will finally have a chance at a real future." She paused dramatically, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. The acting was sickeningly good. "I am beyond thrilled to announce that tonight we have broken every single philanthropic record in the state. We have successfully raised over $4.2 million. Thunderous applause erupted across the massive ballroom. That was my exact cue. I left Desmond frozen in his state of absolute helpless panic at the base of the grand staircase and began my walk down the center aisle. The heavy emerald silk of my custom gown parted the sea of black tuxedos and diamond-draped socialites like the Red Sea. I kept my posture impossibly straight, my eyes locked dead ahead on the podium. The applause began to falter. The enthusiastic clapping died down in uneven, confused waves as the wealthy guests turned to stare at the woman marching toward the stage with the cold, unstoppable authority of an executioner. I reached the carpeted stairs leading up to the stage and ascended with slow, deliberate grace. Chloe finally noticed me. The fake angelic smile melted off her face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer vicious panic. She quickly stepped away from the microphone, rushing to the top of the stairs to physically block my path. She planted her designer heels into the carpet, aggressively crossing her bare arms. "Are you out of your mind, Naomi?" Chloe hissed, her voice dropping to a toxic whisper that only the two of us could hear. "Get off the stage right now. You are making an absolute fool of yourself." I did not stop walking. I stepped onto the final landing, forcing Chloe to take a clumsy step back to avoid a physical collision. "This is not a public charity kitchen," she spat, leaning in close so I could smell the expensive champagne and pure desperation on her breath. "You do not belong in this tax bracket. You do not belong in this family. Go back to whatever Southside project you crawled out of before I have you arrested for trespassing." I looked down at her. She was visibly shaking. Behind her, the federal agents were silently moving into their final tactical positions, locking down the backstage exits and blocking the service elevators. "I am not trespassing, Chloe," I replied, my voice low and smooth. "I own the building. Now step aside before you embarrass yourself in front of the governor." I did not wait for her to move. I stepped around her with a sharp pivot, the heavy silk of my dress brushing dismissively against her legs. I walked directly to the center acrylic podium and grabbed the microphone. The ballroom was completely dead silent. The collective wealth of Atlanta stared up at me, waiting for an explanation. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw the mayor sitting at the front VIP table clutching his napkin. I saw prominent corporate CEOs holding their champagne flutes frozen in midair. I saw Beatrice standing at the very back of the room, her face pale and horrified, as she finally realized her private security team had been completely neutralized and replaced by men wearing earpieces. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing clearly and powerfully through the massive sound system. "My name is Naomi Wilson. I am a senior forensic accountant and the wife of your esteemed tech visionary, Desmond Wilson. Chloe just announced a record-breaking achievement of $4.2 million. I am stepping up here because I would like to make the final and largest donation of the night." I paused, letting the heavy anticipation build in the quiet room. I made sure to look directly at the table where the governor of Georgia was sitting. "I am donating absolute transparency." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "Every single dollar you generously pledged tonight was never going to reach a single underprivileged child in Atlanta," I announced, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "The Vanguard Foundation is not a charity. It is a highly sophisticated digital money laundering syndicate designed entirely to prop up Julian Porter's bankrupt commercial real estate portfolio and fund my husband's fraudulent technology startup." The silence shattered instantly. Loud gasps and angry shouts erupted from the front tables. I raised my voice, cutting effortlessly through the rising chaos in the room. "The second your donations hit the Vanguard primary accounts, a custom ghost script scrubs the origin data and funnels your money directly into untraceable Cayman Island holding accounts." I continued exposing their entire playbook to the absolute highest levels of local government. "You are not philanthropists tonight. You are the unwitting financiers of federal wire fraud and massive corporate tax evasion." Julian tried to make a sudden break for the side exit, but he slammed chest first into a towering man wearing a tactical windbreaker. Beatrice screamed from the back of the room, a shrill, piercing sound of total defeat. I looked out into the crowd and locked eyes with Desmond. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally realized that I had not just beaten him, I had completely annihilated him. "And to ensure my donation is properly received," I said, turning my head to the side, "I have invited some specialized auditors to process tonight's receipts." I stepped back from the podium. The senior IRS criminal investigator stepped forward directly into the bright spotlight, pulling his federal badge high into the air. "Nobody move," his voice boomed over the speakers, carrying the undeniable heavy weight of the United States government. "This building is officially on lockdown. Federal warrants are currently being executed on this premises. Julian Porter, Desmond Wilson, Chloe Porter, and Beatrice Wilson, Keep your hands exactly where I can see them. The federal directive hung in the humid air of the grand ballroom like a guillotine blade. I did not step away from the acrylic podium. My work was not quite finished. Chloe realized her moment of philanthropic glory had been completely hijacked. She lunged forward, grabbing my wrist with her sharp, manicured fingers, trying to physically pry me away from the microphone. Her face was flushed with frantic, arrogant rage. "Get off this stage, you ghetto trash!" Chloe hissed, her voice dropping to a toxic, vicious whisper meant only for my ears. "You do not belong in this tax bracket. You do not belong in this family. You are nothing but a diversity quota accountant who got lucky. Give me the microphone before I have security drag you back to the south side." I looked down at her pale, trembling hand clutching my wrist. I did not raise my voice. I simply twisted my arm with a sharp, practiced motion, breaking her weak grip instantly. I smoothed the emerald silk of my custom gown, stepping squarely into the blinding center spotlight and bringing the microphone directly to my lips. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, definitive nod toward the glass-enclosed audiovisual booth at the back of the mezzanine. I had personally visited the sound engineers 2 hours before the gala, transferring $10,000 into their independent accounts to ensure my specific media files took absolute priority over Chloe's highly produced tearjerker promotional video. The massive 60-foot LED screens behind the stage flickered and went entirely black. A collective gasp rippled through the audience as the screens suddenly illuminated with blinding white light. Instead of glossy footage of newly constructed community centers, the displays were flooded with raw, unredacted forensic financial data. There were thousands of lines of code, time-stamped wire transfers, offshore routing numbers, and deeply hidden dummy corporate registrations. It was the complete digital autopsy of the Vanguard Foundation, displayed in glorious high definition for every single major donor in Atlanta to see. "Let me walk you through your investments," I said, my voice crisp, methodical, and entirely stripped of emotion. I was no longer the discarded daughter-in-law. I was the financial Grim Reaper. If you direct your attention to the left screen, you will see the primary deposit ledger for tonight's gala. Every time one of you swiped a premium black card or authorized a charitable wire transfer, the money entered the Vanguard primary checking account. But it did not stay there for more than 4 seconds. I clicked a small wireless remote in my palm. The screens shifted, highlighting a specific line of automated code flashing in bright red. "This is a ghost script designed by my husband Desmond," I explained, gesturing to his frozen, terrified figure. "At exactly 2 in the morning, every single day, this script automatically bypasses the charity's internal auditing software. It scrubs your names, your addresses, and your original donation intents. It repackages your generous contributions as anonymous international consulting fees and fires them directly into a blind holding account in the Cayman Islands." The crowd began to murmur. Wealthy socialites and powerful politicians were pulling out their reading glasses, squinting at the undeniable proof of their stolen wealth. From the Cayman Islands, the money is split into 2 distinct illegal streams. I continued, clicking the remote again to bring up a highly complex flowchart. 60% of your money, the money you intended to uplift marginalized Black youth in our community, is immediately wired into Apex Development. For those who do not read, the commercial real estate trades, Apex Development is a failing shell company owned entirely by Julian Porter. I pointed directly at Julian, who was sweating profusely under the stage lights, his hands raised awkwardly in the air near the tactical agents. "Julian has not broken ground on a single new construction site in over 4 years," I announced, my voice echoing like thunder. "His commercial properties are completely underwater. He has been using millions of dollars of stolen charity money, siphoned directly from Black philanthropists, to artificially inflate his corporate revenue and secure massive federal construction loans for his white-owned shell companies. He is literally stealing from impoverished youth to pay the interest on his empty glass towers." "Lies!" Julian suddenly shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face flushed bright red. "This is an absolute fabrication. She hacked my servers. She is a bitter, suspended accountant trying to ruin my legitimate business because she is jealous of my family. Do not look at those screens. It is all fake." I ignored his pathetic outburst entirely and clicked the remote for the final time. The right screen transitioned to display a series of extravagant bank statements. The remaining 40% of your donations goes directly to Technova, I stated coldly. Technova is supposedly a cutting-edge software startup founded by Desmond Wilson. However, a brief forensic audit reveals that Technova owns 0 patents, produces 0 software, and has absolutely no actual clients. What Technova does have is a massive payroll consisting entirely of high-end escorts, luxury sports car leases, and a private penthouse in Buckhead. Your charitable donations paid for my husband's mistresses and his bespoke Italian suits. The ballroom erupted. The low murmurs instantly transformed into outright shouting. A prominent state senator sitting in the front row slammed his champagne glass onto the table, shattering the stem. Wealthy donors were pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their private wealth managers and criminal defense attorneys. The sheer audacity of the theft was too horrific to comprehend. Down on the marble floor, the reality of the situation finally breached Beatrice's impenetrable armor of denial. She looked up at the massive screens displaying the irrefutable evidence of her family's complete destruction. Her pristine reputation, her political connections, her untouchable high society supremacy were all evaporating in real time. She clutched her chest, her manicured hands gripping the silver beads of her expensive gown. She let out a short, wet gasp. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and her knees completely buckled. Beatrice collapsed hard onto the marble floor, her diamond necklace clattering loudly against the stone. It was not a calculated socialite faint, it was genuine, total physiological shock. A single federal agent holding a medical kit knelt beside her, checking her pulse, but otherwise the room completely ignored the fallen matriarch. Desmond saw his mother hit the floor and finally snapped out of his terrified paralysis. He realized the front entrance was completely blocked by armed IRS investigators and local police. He spun around, his eyes darting frantically toward the heavy velvet curtains covering the side stage door. It was the service exit leading directly to the loading dock and the valet parking garage. He dropped his champagne flute and bolted. He sprinted across the stage, his expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the polished wood. He reached for the brass handle of the service door, his face twisted in a desperate, panicked grimace. He was fully prepared to leave his mother, his brother-in-law, and his mistress behind to face the federal government while he vanished into the night. Before Desmond's fingers could even touch the cold brass, the heavy wooden door violently swung open from the outside. Desmond slammed hard into a solid chest, stumbling backward onto the stage. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a dark tailored suit and a calm, deeply unimpressed expression stepped through the doorway. It was Marcus. My old college study partner had traded his textbooks for a massive amount of federal authority. He stepped fully into the harsh stage lights, standing directly between Desmond and his only avenue of escape. Marcus slowly reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a gold shield, flipping it open for the entire furious ballroom to see. He looked down at Desmond, who was cowering on the stage floor, and then looked out at Julian, who was still desperately screaming about fabricated documents. "It is not a lie," Julian Marcus said, his deep voice projecting effortlessly across the chaotic room. "It is federal evidence." The absolute finality in Marcus's tone sent a massive shockwave through the grand ballroom. The delicate illusion of high society philanthropy shattered instantly. Total, unadulterated chaos erupted across the massive space. The velvet ropes dividing the VIP tables from the dance floor were trampled as Atlanta's billionaire class scrambled to distance themselves from the blast zone. Cell phone cameras flashed relentlessly, illuminating the sheer panic. Socialites who had kissed Beatrice's cheeks just an hour ago were now actively live-streaming her family's highly public downfall. The room echoed with the frantic, overlapping voices of wealth managers and corporate sponsors screaming into their phones, desperate to freeze transactions and cancel wire transfers before they were implicated in a federal money laundering ring. Julian backed away from Marcus, his hands trembling violently. He looked like a cornered animal realizing the trap had permanently snapped shut. Two FBI agents stepped past Marcus, and grabbed Julian's arms, forcibly spinning him around. They slammed him face first against the polished wood of the stage, pinning him down. The sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tight cut sharply through the noise of the crowd. Julian whimpered, completely stripped of his arrogant real estate mogul persona. His entire fraudulent empire was actively burning to the ground, and he was completely powerless to stop the flames. Chloe completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly, as a senior IRS investigator grabbed her wrists. She kicked and thrashed her diamond-encrusted heels, catching the agent in the shin. She was a woman who had never been told no in her entire privileged life, and the harsh reality of federal handcuffs fundamentally broke her brain. "Get your filthy hands off me!" Chloe shrieked, her shrill voice echoing over the ballroom speakers that were still actively broadcasting the chaos. "Do you know who my father is? I am a porter. My family built this city. I demand to make a phone call right this second. You cannot arrest me for running a charity. You are ruining my dress. I do not belong in a jail cell with these people." The investigator did not even blink. He effortlessly secured the steel cuffs around her wrists, ignoring her screaming racist microaggressions, as if she were a minor traffic violation. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and extreme tax evasion," the agent stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Your father cannot help you in a federal indictment, ma'am. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it immediately." Down on the main floor, paramedics were pushing through the panicked crowd, rushing toward Beatrice's motionless body. Her silver-beaded gown was tangled around her legs, her expensive diamond necklace tossed aside by the EMTs as they strapped an oxygen mask to her face. The untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society was being wheeled out on a stretcher, completely disgraced and broken, while her precious family was marched off the stage in chains. I watched the scene unfold with cold, absolute clarity. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. For years, they had systematically tried to erase my identity, to mold me into a silent, obedient prop for their twisted empire. They had stolen from marginalized communities to fund their excessive greed, all while looking down their noses at my Southside upbringing. Their destruction was entirely self-inflicted. I surveyed the scattered, chaotic crowd below. My eyes caught a sudden, frantic movement near the secondary exit by the Grand Coat Check. A woman in a tight red cocktail dress was desperately trying to shove a thick stack of donation envelopes and loose cash into a designer tote bag. It was Jessica. Desmond's high-end mistress had obviously panicked when the federal agents stormed the stage. She clearly realized her endless supply of stolen charity money was being permanently cut off, and decided to grab whatever physical cash she could steal from the reception desk before making a run for it. She did not make it very far. Two uniformed Atlanta police officers, who were assisting the federal task force, intercepted her before she could even reach the heavy revolving doors. I watched with deep satisfaction as they grabbed her shoulders. Jessica dropped the stolen designer bag, spilling $100 bills across the marble floor. She burst into immediate dramatic tears, sobbing uncontrollably and playing the helpless victim. One of the officers pointed sharply to her wrist. He demanded she remove the massive diamond tennis bracelet Desmond had purchased for her just last month using stolen scholarship funds. I watched her hands shake as she unclasped the jewelry, weeping loudly, as the officer dropped it into a clear plastic evidence bag, citing it as illicitly obtained assets. She had happily traded her dignity for stolen luxury, and now she was leaving in the back of a squad car with absolutely nothing. Back on the stage, the final arrest was unfolding. Desmond had backed himself into the far corner of the stage, completely surrounded by 3 armed agents. The smug, untouchable tech genius, who had physically cornered me in my hotel room just 24 hours ago, was completely gone. He looked small, pathetic, and deeply terrified. The agents grabbed his arms, forcing his hands firmly behind his back. The metal cuffs clicked shut with a harsh, heavy finality. Desmond twisted his neck, struggling against the agent's firm grip to look directly at me. His pristine custom suit was rumpled, his posture completely defeated. The arrogant sneer had been completely replaced by absolute raw terror. He realized in that exact moment that there was no digital backdoor out of this situation. There was no ghost script that could erase multiple federal indictments. His brilliant, untouchable network had been entirely dismantled by the exact woman he had called a penniless fraud. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, desperately seeking the quiet, compliant wife he had emotionally abused and manipulated for years. "Naomi, please." Desmond begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell Marcus you misunderstood the ledgers. We can fix this right now. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you the house and the cars. Just tell them to call it off. Please, Naomi, do not let them take me." I stepped past Marcus, leaving Julian to hyperventilate against the stage floor, and walked directly toward my husband. The chaotic noise of the grand ballroom seemed to fade into a dull background hum. Marcus maintained his iron grip on Desmond's shoulder, reciting the Miranda rights with a cold, rhythmic precision. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Desmond was barely listening to the federal agent locking the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. He kept straining his neck to maintain eye contact with me. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair and staining the collar of his bespoke tuxedo. He looked completely broken, stripped of the arrogant tech billionaire persona he had so carefully crafted for the cameras. "Naomi, we are family," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate, frantic whisper over the noise of the crowd. "You cannot do this to your own husband. Please, I will do anything. I will give you the house. I will give you the Buckhead estate free and clear. I will sign the cars over to you right now. Just tell them I was confused. Tell them I was just holding the money for the charity while the banks sorted out an error. You are a brilliant accountant, Naomi. You can make the numbers look like a simple mistake. Please do not let them take me." I looked at the man who had spent the last 5 years making me feel completely worthless. He genuinely believed I was still the terrified little accountant he could buy off with a house he did not even realize he had lost. He thought my silence over the years was submission, rather than observation. I leaned in close, until I could smell the sharp metallic scent of his fear, mixed with his expensive cologne. The federal agents did not step between us. Marcus gave me a barely perceptible nod, allowing me to deliver the final killing blow. "You cannot give me what I already own, Desmond," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of pity. He stopped struggling against the handcuffs. His tear-filled eyes locked onto mine in total confusion. The gears in his head were grinding, attempting to process my words. "What are you talking about?" he stammered. "I bought the Buckhead estate 3 days ago," I explained, watching the comprehension slowly dawn on his face. "When you forged my signature to quietly transfer the property deed into that dummy corporation to hide the asset from the divorce proceedings, you failed to verify the buyer. You were in such a frantic rush to liquidate the house and hide the cash that you sold our home to the Onyx Vanguard Trust for a fraction of its market value. That is my private blind trust, Desmond. I paid for it with my own independent wealth. I am the sole legal proprietor of that estate." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. I was not finished. "And your precious technology startup?" I continued, leaning even closer, keeping my tone low and conversational. "When you panicked about the federal freeze hitting Julian's accounts, you frantically initiated an emergency transfer of your entire intellectual property portfolio. You thought you were sending the source code to an offshore secure server in Panama to keep it out of the SEC's hands. You really should check your routing protocols before executing a blind transfer. You beamed every single line of your proprietary code directly into my personal encrypted server. I hold the sole digital keys to Technova. I own your entire life's work. You are officially completely bankrupt," I whispered, my words cutting through his shattered ego like a surgical blade. "You have absolutely no money. You have no company. You are entirely homeless. And thanks to the pristine, high-definition audio recording you freely gave me in my hotel room, boasting about washing charity money, you are facing 15 years in a federal penitentiary." Desmond's knees buckled. If Marcus and the other agent had not been holding his arms firmly behind his back, he would have collapsed face first onto the wooden stage. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving violently, as the absolute reality of his complete financial and social annihilation finally set in. He looked out at the massive ballroom. His mother Beatrice was currently being loaded onto a medical gurney by paramedics, an oxygen mask strapped over her face. His brother-in-law Julian was being marched out the side doors in handcuffs, loudly cursing the Wilson family for dragging him into this criminal mess. His high-end mistress Jessica was already sitting in the back of a police cruiser, her stolen diamonds locked in a plastic evidence bag. He had absolutely no one left to manipulate and nowhere left to run. For years he had told me I was too small, too quiet, too insignificant to ever survive in his elite, fast-paced world. He had constantly reminded me that I lacked the killer instinct required to build real wealth and command respect. He was entirely wrong. I possessed a much more dangerous instinct. I had infinite patience. I had endured every insult, every public humiliation, every cruel joke at my expense while silently mapping out the exact architecture of his fragile, fraudulent empire. I had found every single load-bearing pillar, and tonight I had simply pulled the detonator and watched the entire structure collapse. I slowly unclasped my emerald silk clutch. I reached inside past my cell phone and my favorite crimson lipstick. My fingers brushed against a small square of paper. It was the exact same piece of stationery Desmond had used to leave me a cruel, condescending note on the kitchen island the morning he demanded a divorce and tried to leave me with absolutely nothing. He had told me to leave the keys on the counter. I pulled the yellow sticky note from my bag. I reached forward and slapped it firmly onto the silk lapel of his ruined custom tuxedo. Desmond stared down at the bright yellow square resting against his chest, his eyes wide with absolute horror. I stepped back, smoothing the front of my gown and allowing the federal agents to pull him toward the exit. It reads, "Pack your things." I watched the heavy glass doors of the grand ballroom swing shut behind the federal agents. The bright yellow sticky note fluttered slightly on Desmond's ruined lapel as he disappeared into the back of a waiting transport van. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers painted the Atlanta night sky, reflecting sharply off the marble columns of the luxury hotel. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting absolute, undisputed victory in the crisp night air. It was finally over. The empire had fallen. Exactly 14 days later, the entire landscape of Atlanta high society had been permanently scorched to the earth. The Vanguard Foundation scandal had completely dominated the national news cycle for 2 straight weeks. The fallout was swift, merciless, and absolutely complete. Julian Porter and Chloe Porter had their assets immediately frozen, pending a massive federal investigation into their shell companies. The country club they had lorded over for decades formally and publicly revoked their memberships. Former friends and political allies scrambled over each other to give statements to the press, vehemently denying any real connection to the disgraced family. But nobody suffered a harder, faster fall from grace than Beatrice Wilson. The untouchable matriarch of the Southern elite had been entirely stripped of her power. The federal government had systematically frozen every single bank account associated with the Wilson name. Her offshore safety nets had been seized by the IRS. Her fleet of luxury vehicles was towed away by federal marshals in broad daylight while news helicopters hovered overhead. And because I had legally and quietly purchased the massive Buckhead estate out from under her, she was served with an immediate, unceremonious eviction notice. She had been given exactly 2 hours to pack a single suitcase before the locks were changed by private security. The woman who once hosted private catered dinners for state senators was now renting a decaying 1-bedroom apartment in a deeply neglected industrial stretch on the far outskirts of the city. According to the private investigator I had hired to keep an eye on her, the heating in the complex barely worked, the pipes rattled loudly behind peeling floral wallpaper, and the security gate had been broken for years. It was the exact type of neighborhood Beatrice used to complain about when her driver was forced to take a detour. I was sitting in my newly acquired corner suite at the most prestigious forensic accounting firm in the city reviewing the final asset seizure reports when my sleek desk intercom buzzed. My receptionist sounded genuinely hesitant and deeply uncomfortable. She informed me that a woman claiming to be my mother-in-law was standing in the lobby, aggressively refusing to leave until she spoke with me. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, a cold, sharp smile forming on my lips. I pressed the intercom button and told the receptionist to send her back immediately. The woman who slowly shuffled through my heavy glass double doors looked completely broken. The physical transformation was genuinely staggering. Beatrice had entirely lost her rigid, intimidating posture. Her custom-tailored designer wardrobe had been replaced by a wrinkled gray synthetic sweater and plain, shapeless trousers that hung loosely on her shrinking frame. Her perfectly manicured nails were chipped and completely bare. Her silver hair, usually sprayed into an impenetrable, flawless helmet, hung limp and flat against her pale, gaunt face. She clutched a cheap faux leather handbag to her chest like a desperate shield. She looked old, tired, and completely defeated. She stood awkwardly in the center of my spacious office, staring at the imported modern art on my walls and the sweeping panoramic view of the bustling city skyline behind my desk. She swallowed hard, her legendary pride visibly choking her as she finally forced herself to meet my eyes. "Naomi," she began, her voice trembling and shockingly weak. "I need your help." I stared at her in complete, absolute silence, letting the heavy, suffocating weight of her desperation fill the large room. I did not offer her a seat. I simply waited for her to continue groveling. "The apartment is freezing, Naomi!" Beatrice stammered, her hands shaking as she gripped her cheap purse. "The heater is completely broken and the landlord refuses to answer any of my calls. The water is brown. All of my friends have blocked my phone number. The country club will not even let me pass the front security gate to retrieve my personal golf clubs. I have absolutely nothing left. I cannot live like this. I just need a small monthly stipend. Just a few $1,000s so I can move into a respectable neighborhood until this horrible legal mess is sorted out. Please, Naomi, we are family. I am still your mother-in-law." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed harshly against the glass walls of my office. "Family." I repeated the word, tasting like absolute poison on my tongue. "You never considered me family, Beatrice. For 5 long years you treated me like an unwanted stray dog that somehow wandered into your pristine, spotless mansion. You made me eat in the kitchen with the catering staff during your high society dinners, because you claimed my presence would ruin your carefully curated aesthetic. You constantly mocked my clothes, my background, and my public school education. You told all of your wealthy friends that Desmond only married me to satisfy a corporate diversity quota for his startup." Beatrice flinched violently, tears welling in her tired, sunken eyes. "I was just trying to protect our family legacy," she whispered weakly, her voice cracking. "I was just trying to maintain our high standards." "You have no legacy, Beatrice," I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "Your entire standard of living was funded by actively stealing money from marginalized children. You built your massive, towering ego by stepping directly on my neck, and now you are standing in my corporate office begging for the spare change you somehow assume I owe you." She reached out a shaking, fragile hand toward my polished mahogany desk. "Please, Naomi, I am begging you. I am an old woman. I cannot survive out there." Vive. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, locking my eyes onto hers with absolute, terrifying clarity. "You are not getting a single dime from me, Beatrice. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I highly suggest you go out there and pull yourself up by your bootstraps." Is that not the exact phrase you used to tell the scholarship kids your fake charity was supposedly helping? The words hit her like a physical, brutal blow. The last remaining microscopic fragment of her aristocratic pride completely shattered into dust. Beatrice let out a pathetic, muffled sob, covering her face with her shaking bare hands. She turned around and slowly shuffled out of my office, her shoulders slumped in ultimate, absolute defeat. She had finally realized that she was entirely powerless, invisible, and completely alone in a world she used to rule with an iron fist. I watched the heavy glass door click shut behind her, feeling a profound, settling sense of total closure. My private desk line rang instantly, shattering the quiet atmosphere of the room. I picked up the receiver without looking at the caller ID. It was District Attorney Vance, the lead prosecutor handling the federal indictment. Naomi, the district attorney, said, his voice practically buzzing with dark professional amusement. "I thought you would like a quick update from the federal holding facility downtown." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Tell me everything, Vance." Desmond, Julian, and Chloe have been sitting in adjoining interrogation rooms for the past 3 hours, he explained. The reality of federal prison time finally broke them. They are currently screaming at the top of their lungs, completely turning on each other. They are desperately trying to cut plea bargains by throwing each other directly under the bus. I told Vance to let them tear each other apart. Let them exhaust their expensive legal retainers fighting over the captain's chair of a rapidly sinking ship. I hung up the phone and turned my attention back to the city skyline. The storm had finally broken. The preliminary plea and bail hearing took place exactly 72 hours later at the Richard B. Russell Federal Building downtown. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity. The gallery was standing room only, filled with local journalists, defrauded charity donors, and curious onlookers eager to witness the final gruesome spectacle of the Porter and Wilson collapse. I sat quietly in the first row directly behind the prosecutor's table, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit and an expression of complete professional detachment. A heavy wooden door beside the judge's bench swung open and the bailiffs led them in. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. Desmond, Julian, and Chloe were completely stripped of their bespoke suits and designer silk. They wore bright, oversized orange federal jumpsuits. Their hands and ankles were bound in heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against the polished hardwood floor. Chloe looked entirely feral. Her blonde hair was a greasy, tangled mess, and her face was blotchy and pale, devoid of the expensive cosmetics she relied on to project superiority. Julian was sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically around the room as if searching for a magical escape hatch. Desmond looked completely hollowed out, a fragile, empty shell of a man shuffling toward the defense tables. The hearing devolved into an absolute bloodbath the second the judge banged his gavel. The defendants were technically co-conspirators, but they had hired 3 separate cutthroat defense teams. Loyalty was dead. Survival was the only objective. Julian and Chloe's defense attorney, a silver-haired man who specialized in defending old money, stood up first. He immediately launched into a deeply calculated, incredibly offensive narrative. "Your Honor, my clients are legacy philanthropists," he argued, his voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. "The Porter family has served Atlanta for generations. They are not criminal masterminds. They were systematically manipulated and financially bullied by an aggressive, highly demanding tech CEO who leveraged his marriage into their family to execute his own fraudulent schemes. Desmond Wilson overwhelmed their good nature. He used complex digital algorithms they simply did not understand. They are victims of his relentless corporate aggression." I watched Desmond physically recoil at the defense table. The absolute betrayal registered on his face in real time. For years, he had alienated me and compromised his own morals just to be accepted by this elite white family. He had funded their lavish lifestyles and protected their bankrupt businesses. And the absolute second they faced federal consequences, they immediately weaponized his race and his ambition, painting him as a dangerous, aggressive black man who had terrorized their innocent aristocratic family. Desmond's attorney leapt to his feet, furiously shouting objections. He claimed Desmond was just a naive software developer who was seduced by old money and forced into a corner by the powerful Porter real estate syndicate. It was a pathetic circular firing squad of immense privilege and cowardice. The judge looked completely exhausted by the theatrical display. He rubbed his temples and looked down at the prosecution table. District Attorney Vance stood up and straightened his tie. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls its primary forensic expert and key witness to clarify the exact nature of this conspiracy. The prosecution calls Naomi Wilson." I stood up from the gallery. The entire courtroom went dead silent as I walked through the wooden swinging gate and took the witness stand. I placed my right hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. I opened my leather portfolio and pulled out my tablet, syncing it seamlessly to the courtroom's overhead display monitors. Mrs. Wilson Vance began pacing slowly in front of the jury box. The defense claims that Julian and Chloe Porter were merely passive, naive victims of your husband's complex technological manipulation. Does the forensic data support this narrative? I leaned into the microphone. My voice was crisp, clinical, and entirely devoid of emotion. No, it does not, I stated simply. Wire fraud requires distinct digital intent, and embezzlement requires authorized access. Desmond Wilson wrote the ghost script that scrubbed the Vanguard Foundation donations. That is a fact. However, the ghost script was programmed with a mandatory tri-factor authorization protocol. It could not execute a single financial transfer without 3 simultaneous digital signatures. I tapped my tablet screen. A massive, highly detailed digital access log flashed onto the monitors for the entire courtroom to see. Desmond possessed the first key I explained, pointing to the glowing data points. But the second key belonged exclusively to Chloe Porter. Her digital signature, biometric fingerprint, and personal device IP address were required to initiate the daily transfer from the charity's primary ledger. She manually approved the theft of $4.2 million over a period of 36 months, logging into the system every single night at 2 in the morning. Chloe buried her face in her chained hands, sobbing loudly. And the third key, I continued, my voice cutting through her pathetic tears, belonged to Julian Porter. The offshore Cayman Island accounts were registered entirely under his name, using his corporate tax identification numbers. In order to receive the stolen funds, Julian had to manually accept the wire transfers using a secure bank token that never left his physical possession. He personally authorized the receipt of illicit funds hundreds of times. I tapped the screen one final time. A pie chart appeared, breaking down the exact distribution of the stolen money down to the final cent. This was not manipulation, Your Honor, I concluded, looking directly at the judge. This was a perfectly synchronized tripartite criminal syndicate. They were equal partners. They split the stolen funds exactly 3 ways. There are no victims at the defense table today. There are only 3 highly organized thieves who believed they were simply too wealthy to ever face the mathematical consequences of their actions. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The defense attorneys slowly sank back into their leather chairs, recognizing that their multi-million-dollar legal strategies had just been completely incinerated by basic, undeniable math. Numbers do not care about old money. Numbers do not care about social status or country club memberships. Numbers only tell the absolute truth. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the 3 defendants with profound visible disgust. The forensic evidence presented is overwhelming and irrefutable, the judge announced, his voice booming through the silent room. Given the massive scale of the fraud, the extensive use of offshore accounts, and the clear, coordinated deception, I am classifying all 3 defendants as severe flight risks. Bail is unconditionally denied. Julian let out a loud, agonizing groan. Chloe screamed for her father, her voice cracking in pure, hysterical panic. Desmond did not make a sound. The bailiffs stepped forward, grabbing their arms to escort them back to the holding cells. As Desmond was pulled away from the defense table, he stopped and looked back at me one final time. There was no anger left in his eyes. There was no arrogance and no pride. There was only the hollow, empty realization that he had sacrificed everything real in his life for an illusion that had just locked him in a cage. I did not blink. I did not look away. I simply watched him disappear through the heavy wooden door. I gathered my tablet and stepped down from the witness stand. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, the crowd parting silently to let me pass. I pushed through the heavy brass doors of the federal building and stepped out onto the wide concrete steps. The bright Atlanta sun warmed my face. I closed my eyes and took a long, deep breath, pulling the crisp morning air into my lungs. For the first time in 5 years, I felt entirely, completely light. I was finally absolutely free. My phone began vibrating violently inside my leather tote before I even reached the bottom of the federal courthouse steps. The caller ID flashed the name of the senior managing partner at my former accounting firm. This was the exact same man who had nervously handed me a suspension notice just weeks prior, utterly terrified of the Wilson family influence and desperate to protect his elite client roster. Now he was calling to aggressively grovel. I let the phone ring 4 times before finally pressing accept. He did not even bother with a standard professional greeting. He immediately launched into a frantic, breathless apology begging for my forgiveness. He told me the executive partners had convened an emergency morning meeting the second the news broke. My suspension was officially and completely lifted. They were not just asking me to return to my cubicle, they were offering me a highly coveted fast-track promotion to senior partner. He practically shouted over the phone, promising a massive corner office, a substantial equity share in the firm, and total control over their largest corporate accounts. I listened to his desperate pitch as I walked down the busy, sunlit Atlanta sidewalk. A few months ago, this incredibly rare offer would have been the ultimate professional validation. It would have been the exact career milestone I had sacrificed my sleep, my health, and my sanity to achieve. I smiled, listening to the city traffic roaring past me. I politely interrupted his frantic rambling. I told him I was officially declining the partnership. I told him I no longer needed a seat at their corporate table because I was currently in the process of buying their entire building. I hung up the phone and dropped it back into my bag. I was not speaking metaphorically. During the absolute chaos of the federal indictments, Julian Porter's highly leveraged commercial real estate portfolio had completely and violently imploded. When the offshore money laundering accounts were permanently frozen, Julian immediately defaulted on his massive commercial construction loans. The major banks panicked and triggered emergency liquidation clauses, auctioning off his prime downtown high-rises for literal pennies on the dollar. My blind trust, Onyx Vanguard, had been sitting quietly in the shadows, patiently waiting for the exact moment the market flooded with his distressed assets. I swooped in and legally purchased the very glass towers Julian had used to fund his arrogant lifestyle. The elite white businessmen who used to snub me at catering events were now officially writing their monthly rent checks directly to my holding company. Desmond's intellectual property was the second massive pillar of my new empire. Because he had manually and legally transferred the encrypted source code directly to my personal servers to hide it from the SEC, it was completely insulated from the federal asset forfeiture. Desmond had built a fraudulent shell company, but the underlying predictive code he had stolen and repurposed actually possessed immense market value in the private sector. I hired a team of elite ethical hackers to scrub the architecture and legally patented the functional algorithms under my own name. I immediately licensed the software to legitimate global cybersecurity firms, generating a massive continuous stream of passive 8-figure revenue. I had taken the burning ashes of their fraudulent syndicate and built a flawless, legally impenetrable fortress of wealth. I was no longer a middle-class accountant married into high society. I was a self-made titan. With the assets fully secured, I needed a central command for my operations. I leased the top 2 floors of the exact same commercial high-rise where my former accounting firm rented their modest third-floor offices. I spent 3 weeks meticulously overseeing the custom renovations. I wanted the space to reflect absolute transparency and undeniable power. I installed floor-to-ceiling structural glass imported white marble floors and a state-of-the-art digital security mainframe. I stood in the center of the pristine lobby, watching the installation team mount the heavy brushed steel letters onto the main reception wall. The sign read, Vanguard Financial Forensics. I specifically chose to reclaim the Vanguard name. Chloe and Desmond had weaponized that word to disguise their theft and exploit vulnerable communities. I was going to wash the blood off the name and use it to actively hunt people exactly like them. My new firm specialized exclusively in dismantling highly sophisticated corporate fraud. In less than a month, my client waiting list was entirely full. Whistleblowers, corporate boards, and independent federal contractors were practically breaking down my doors, desperate to hire the woman who had single-handedly annihilated the most powerful corrupt family in Georgia. It was late Friday afternoon when I finally left my new corporate headquarters. I bypassed my private driver and took the keys to my own custom black sedan. There was one final piece of personal business I needed to attend to. I navigated the heavy Atlanta traffic, steering the car north toward the exclusive, heavily wooded neighborhoods of Buckhead. I pulled onto the familiar, winding, tree-lined street. The massive wrought iron security gates of the estate loomed at the end of the long, private driveway. This was the exact house where I had spent 5 years constantly walking on eggshells. This was the house where Beatrice had openly sneered at my wardrobe, and Desmond had constantly reminded me how incredibly lucky I was to live under his expensive roof. This was the exact location where my husband had coldly stared me in the eye and told me to pack my bags because failures did not belong in his pristine world. The gates automatically swung open, recognizing the encrypted transponder signal from my vehicle. I drove up the sweeping circular driveway and parked the car directly in front of the massive imported oak double doors. The property was entirely silent. The federal raid had completely cleared out the staff, the luxury vehicles, and the superficial trappings of the Wilson legacy. I stepped out of the car. The late afternoon sun cast long, beautiful shadows across the manicured front lawn. The air here used to feel heavy, suffocating, and thick with toxic expectations. Now it just smelled like blooming magnolias and absolute victory. I walked up the wide stone steps, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I reached into my emerald silk clutch and pulled out a single heavy brass key. Desmond had demanded I leave my copy on the kitchen island the morning he tried to destroy me. He thought he was locking me out of his elite inner circle forever. He never realized I was simply stepping back to buy the entire circle. I slid the brass key into the heavy lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying metallic click. I pushed the massive oak door open and stepped inside, taking a deep breath of the cool, empty air. The house was finally perfectly mine. I stepped across the threshold and let the heavy oak door close behind me, shutting out the world. The grand foyer was vast and eerily quiet, but it still reeked of the Wilson family. Every corner of the sprawling mansion bore the undeniable stain of Beatrice's suffocatingly gaudy taste and Desmond's arrogant tech billionaire aesthetic. I stood in the center of the imported marble floor and felt a massive wave of completely unchecked energy wash over me. It was time to purge. I walked directly into the formal living room. Heavy dark velvet drapes blocked out the natural sunlight, making the massive space feel like a Victorian mausoleum. Beatrice had spent a fortune on those hideous curtains, insisting they projected old money elegance. I grabbed the edge of the thick velvet fabric and yanked downward with all my strength. The heavy brass curtain rod snapped, tearing away from the drywall and crashing to the floor. Brilliant late afternoon sunlight flooded the room for the first time in years. I did not stop there. I moved methodically from room to room, pulling the toxic history of that family down from the walls. I stripped away Beatrice's grotesque gold-leafed mirrors that had only ever reflected my own misery back at me. I took down the massive, pretentious oil paintings of fake ancestors she had purchased at auction to manufacture a pedigree. Next, I tackled Desmond's remaining trash. I marched into his private, customized den. The room was a monument to his fragile ego. I grabbed his absurd collection of participation trophies, his framed tech magazine covers bought with stolen charity funds, and his ridiculously expensive display of untouched vintage scotch. I carried them all out to the front driveway. I had already called a premium junk removal service. When the massive commercial dump truck backed up to the front steps, I stood on the porch and happily directed the crew to toss every single trace of my former abusers directly into the trash compactor. I watched the mechanical jaws crush Desmond's custom golf clubs and Beatrice's antique side tables into splintered debris. I paid the crew double their asking price and watched them haul my nightmares away to the local landfill. Over the next 6 weeks, I completely transformed the entire estate. I hired independent local contractors to strip the dark, oppressive wallpaper and paint every single wall a brilliant, clean white. I replaced the heavy antique furniture with sleek, modern, minimalist pieces that actually allowed me to breathe. The house stopped being a museum of inherited arrogance and finally became a home, a fortress built on absolute truth. Tonight was the official unveiling. I was hosting my first real celebratory dinner, and the guest list was strictly curated. There were no fake socialites, no corrupt wealth managers, and absolutely no toxic family members allowed past my security gates. The catering team I hired was setting up in the massive open concept kitchen. The air smelled of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and seared filet mignon. The heavy silence that used to choke this house was completely replaced by vibrant, loud, joyful laughter. My guests began arriving just as the sun started setting over the rolling hills of Buckhead. Marcus, the brilliant SEC investigator who had helped me execute the final takedown, walked through the front door carrying a bottle of exceptionally rare vintage champagne. He gave me a warm, familiar hug, congratulating me on the official launch of Vanguard Financial Forensics. Behind him came my new inner circle. I had invited the 5 brilliant young women I was currently mentoring at my new firm. They were fierce, intelligent, independent accountants who reminded me of exactly who I used to be before Desmond tried to break my spirit. We were joined by my loyal private investigator, my fiercely protective attorneys, and the handful of genuine friends who had secretly supported my quiet rebellion. The evening flowed with a beautiful, effortless rhythm. We drank expensive wine, ate incredible food, and shared stories of survival and triumph. There was no walking on eggshells. There was no pretending to be someone I was not. I looked around the room and realized I had successfully replaced a family of parasites with a community of fierce, dedicated protectors. As the catering staff cleared the main courses, I stood up and walked toward the head of the massive imported marble dining table. I rested my fingertips against the cool, smooth stone. This was the exact spot where Desmond used to hold court demanding absolute obedience. This was the exact spot where I had found that bright yellow sticky note months ago, coldly instructing me to pack my things and leave the keys on the counter. He had intended to leave me with absolutely nothing. He had grossly miscalculated. I picked up my crystal flute filled with the sparkling vintage champagne Marcus had brought. I tapped my fork lightly against the glass. The vibrant chatter around the table immediately silenced. Every face turned toward me, looking up with genuine, absolute respect. I raised my glass high. For years I was told that I was too quiet, too small, and too insignificant to survive in this world. I began, my voice ringing out clear and steady across the massive dining room. I was told that loyalty meant absolute submission, and that family meant accepting abuse in exchange for security. I was told to shrink myself so other people could feel large. I looked at the brilliant young women sitting at my table. I looked at Marcus, who nodded in silent agreement. But we do not shrink, I continued. We observe, we calculate, we survive the fire, and we use the ashes to build our own empires. This toast is to self-respect. This toast is to knowing your absolute, indisputable worth, even when the people who are supposed to love you try to convince you that you have none. And above all else, this is a toast to the math. Because people will manipulate you. People will lie to your face and steal your future. But the numbers never lie. My guests raised their glasses in unison. Hear, hear, Marcus called out, a wide, proud smile on his face. We drank the champagne, tasting the crisp, effervescent flavor of total victory. I turned my head and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the back of the dining room. The sprawling, perfectly manicured lawn sloped downward, revealing an unobstructed, breathtaking view of the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city lights sparkled like diamonds against the dark night sky. The empire they tried to keep from me was now entirely mine to command. I took one final, deeply satisfying breath of fresh air. Fade to black. The profound lesson from these narratives is that your true worth is never defined by the conditional approval of a toxic family. When relatives constantly belittle your dreams or exploit your loyalty, the ultimate victory isn't found in bitter retaliation, but in fiercely choosing yourself. Financial independence and unwavering self-respect are your greatest safety nets. By stepping away from manipulation and quietly building your own success, you reclaim your power and prove that living authentically is the sweetest revenge. Share your own experiences of overcoming toxic environments and reclaiming your power in the comments below, and please subscribe for more empowering stories.